First, the development of a European data sharing infrastructure to facilitate the access and exchange of energy data between products and between market actors. It's a very important point, of course, for today's workshop. So I'll come back to that point in a moment. But let me say a word on the second area of intervention, which concerns the empowerment of consumers. We want to look at how digitization can support their engagement in energy markets and what must be done to preserve their rights and increase their digital skills. The third area is about enhancing the uptake of digital technologies in the energy sector, both on the supply side and the demand side, in a way, of course, that generates growth and jobs. We will be looking at the whole innovation chain and address not only research and innovation, of course, but also the market uptake of best available digital solutions in every sector, and how can we mobilize large-scale investment for the uptake of new digital solutions in the energy sector. Fourth, we will also be looking at the other side of the coin. What must be done to ensure cybersecurity and data protection? And finally, fifth and last part of the plan, we will propose measures to reduce the carbon footprint of ICT solutions, meaning measures that increase energy efficiency, reuse waste heat, and promote the use of renewable energy sources. So as you can see, it's a very comprehensive plan. I want to zoom in now in my next slide on the first intervention area, because that, of course, is the most relevant for today's workshop. And that is the development of a European data sharing infrastructure to facilitate the access and exchange of energy data. Data exchange is key to the development of new energy services, and it is an issue that is considered of utmost importance for the stakeholders that we have consulted. We've had numerous meetings with many market actors, and that came time and again, that importance of fostering data exchange. And that also came very prominently in our open public consultation, which closed on the 24th of January, and where we asked citizens and market actors what they thought were the three main risks that the integration of digital solutions may bring to the energy system and which should be addressed in the action plan. And what came first was the lack of interoperability because of insufficient use of commonly agreed standards for data exchange for systems and devices. So that was very clear from the open public consultation, and that risk was even rated higher than the risk of cyber attacks. If we move to the next slide, facilitating data exchange is key to develop new energy services that brings demand-side flexibility in the energy market, that foster the integration of renewable energies, and also help optimize the planning, the operating, and monitoring of energy infrastructure. And for these reasons, we are considering developing a common European energy data space, meaning an interoperable framework of common standards and practices that are specific to the energy sector to share or jointly process data. And together with it would come a data exchange governance structure that would guide and manage the process. And the idea is that such a scheme would benefit all players along the entire value chain. I mean, the network operators, the energy suppliers, of course, but also the end consumers, the aggregators, the energy service companies, the billing managers, financings, and other actors like car manufacturers and others. I mean, new actors included who can enter the market and offer new services to their clients. We move to the next slide. We will be able to use, or at least to build usefully on provisions in existing or legislation to be revised that is currently under discussion with Parliament and Council, and which foster the access to data. For example, the provisions in the revised Renewables Directive that define access to data requirements for the smart and bidirectional charging of electric vehicles, or the new provision in the revised Buildings Directive that define access to buildings data to enable smart building services and renovation. These new provisions, which are not yet adopted, I mean, there are discussions at the moment as we speak. They are being discussed in Parliament and Council, but hopefully these discussions, these negotiations will run smoothly, and these new revised legislation should be adopted, and they will come in addition to the existing provisions in the Electricity Market Directive and Regulation. For example, the provisions there regarding data for smart meters. So that will of course create a solid legal basis to foster data exchange, and you can see here that what the Commission proposed last year in the Green Deal package should reinforce the data access. But it is clear as well that this will not be sufficient to establish a fully fledged European data sharing infrastructure, and we need, therefore, further efforts in this area. And this is why today's workshop is very timely. The objective is to present the basic principles and some best practices to drive data exchange. I think we've got a very good program, and the ultimate goal is to draw useful lessons that can help us establish a common energy data space in Europe. So we're looking forward to listening to the different speakers and see what we can learn from their experience and what we can get as tips that will help the European Commission set up such an energy data space. If we move to the next slide, please. This workshop that we're having today is the first of a series of events on digitization that will take place in the next 2 weeks. And they are organized either by the Commission, DG Connect, DG Energy, or other organizations which also help in the organization of these events. And you see the list of these workshops on this slide. The one we organize on Friday this week will also address data sharing issues, but for a specific use case, the integration of electric vehicles in the energy system. And the ones next week, we will address respectively the priorities in the energy transition that require enhanced data exchanges at EU level, specific case of data sharing in renewable energy, promotion of cooperation between energy centers and the new digital innovation hubs. And finally, there will be a last workshop on the 3rd of March on prosumer data exchanges organized by Smart Energy Europe. We move to the next slide, please. You can find more information about these workshops on our website. You will also find there more information about the action plan that we are preparing. In terms of timeline, our objective is to have the action plan adopted towards the end of June, and I trust that today's workshop will give us a lot of insights for its preparation. So I'm looking forward to listening to the different speakers, and I would like now to pass the floor to my colleague Max Lemko from DG Connect for his introduction on behalf of his Director General. Max, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for introducing me here. I'm trying to share my presentation just so that we could get that up now. Let me see whether that works. Can you now see my presentation?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, so you can see it. So thank you very much, Vincent, for introducing the overall picture already. So that's very good, and I would like to stress here again that this is good collaboration between DG Connect and DG ENA on this series of workshops, but on the digitalization of energy action plan in general. So I'm looking forward to finalizing this plan in June, and I hope that these workshops are helpful for maturing the plan and already going into, well, give us some guidance on how we could implement it afterwards. So I think this is very timely. And I would like to just give you a bit of an overview now from the digital side, because you have already explained all the framework. So I don't want to repeat what you have said. So I would go on the digital side and how the digitalization of energy action plan links to the digital policy that we have and what is most important for this particular workshop. So there are many communications and many acts at the moment published, so I would focus on everything related to data. I mean, you have also heard about the Ships Act, and so I will not go on to that, but I'm sure it will also come up at one or the other point in the workshops, because the next generation of ships is important for the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things is the one that delivers the data. And the data is important for the future of energy. So we see that digital is transferring the way we live, and in particular the way sectors work. So we see in many sectors new players coming. We see some disruptions coming. We see new players coming, and mobility, energy. You see, for example, the big actors like Tesla, who weren't there some years ago, and who are contributing to revolutionizing those sectors. And new players means new game. The ecosystem is changing, and that also new game means some lose, some will win. There are definitely new opportunities. So let's see it positive. We need to tackle the opportunities. And new players mean new sources of data, more fragmentation in the beginning, when there are many, before it comes to a consolidation. And that means we need to get that organized. And the energy data space that we are all addressing here is one way to get that organized. But there we have to be very careful to take also into account the challenges that we face. And I mean, you heard it in the press, in particular recently, also in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Cybersecurity is a key point, but as well data access, governance, data protection, privacy, and last not least, the growing energy consumption of the IT sector itself. So while having said that as an introduction, let me now go into the meat of the whole meeting. I mean, Commissioner Breton, the Commissioner for the Internal Market, has made his ambitions very clear on data. That European data, he wants European data will be used for European companies in priority for us to create value. So when we look at energy, it's not just at the energy objectives, but it's also the objective of having our companies be competitive. So create value from the data. And the big slogan always is to become the most data-empowered continent in the world. So that's the initial word of the Commissioner. So the European data strategy basically has two pillars, and in each pillar it has two objectives. So the two pillars of the data strategy are the next generation cloud federation. So meaning that Europe will have will support a cloud infrastructure where also some resources or a larger share of the resources are provided by European actors on European soil. So that means co-investment in cloud-to-edge services, cloud federation, and marketplaces. And there are the two sides of the coin: the investment on the one hand through our programs and through supported by the European Alliance for Industrial Data Edge and Cloud, and also supported in the important project of common European interest on next generation cloud that the member states are planning. And on the other hand, the legislative side, the regulatory side, that's a rule book. So a rule book means all the actors in Europe play according to the same rules. And that allows us to also integrate very well the hyperscalers who have a big share of the market. So that means who is on European ground and who provides services in Europe should provide them according to European rules. On the other side, we have the data actions. There, first of all, we have the legislation, and we have as well the investments in the different data spaces. And you see around this, on this circle on the right-hand side, you see all the data spaces that we are investing in, and energy is one of them. So co-investment in common European data spaces and legislation, the two pillars on the data side. And you see initiatives like Gaia-X who complement this and who integrate with what we do on a European level. So if I go a little bit in the legislation, I want to just give you an overview here. The overview basically contains the communications of this commission. So some of them are already further, like the first one, the Data Governance Act, which looks at the trust in data transactions. There is already a political agreement reached between the Parliament and member states. So it's advanced. The Digital Market Act is a bit less advanced, but it's also quite close. And it is about regulating the market power based on data. That's all about gatekeepers, for example, so that the gatekeepers, some of the big companies, keep it fair and keep their role to what their role really is and don't misuse their role. So it's about personal data and private sector data held by online platforms and which is originating from the user. So that's a very important one, I would see, for competitiveness of our industry. And there are two in the pipe that are expected to come in the next couple of weeks. That is the Implementation Act for High Value Data Set to unleash the socio-economic potential of data as a public good. And then the Data Act, which should ensure fairness in the allocation of data value among the actors of the economy. And that is very important also for the energy sector. I come to that in a minute. I think there's one important one that is always a bit in the background, and that is artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence will be an instrument for us to use when it comes to using data. So we have to guarantee the safety and the fundamental rights of people and businesses. And we had the Artificial Intelligence Act in April 21 that put the basis for that. So that I think when you work on data and data spaces, this is what you have to keep in your thinking. Now, when I talk about data spaces, I could now give a long presentation about data spaces, but I want to keep it very short with this word cloud. Data space is an ecosystem for data sharing. It is an infrastructure, but it also has a certain governance. So it's a combination of infrastructure and governance. It can become a platform in the sense of a double-sided marketplace. It could have business models, marketplace, but it should become an ecosystem for all actors. And you can as well make money on that, on sharing data, or you have to pay for using data. Important is that it's open to everybody, that it's interoperable, that you can reuse data, and that you can also have access to legacy data. And the last group of principles, we have to be sure that it's secure, protects privacy, and supports sovereignty in a way. And the most important principle there is that data sharing is voluntary. So companies can decide whether they want to share their data. And I will not go into detail here on where data sits in EU priorities, but there are the different communications, the different acts that the Commission had fit for 55, the one hand, and then delivering the European Green Deal strategy. That's the energy side, and you have heard about it. And then we have the Fit for the Digital Age and the Path to the Digital Decade. That were the major communications on the digital side, supporting the digital twin and the green transformation of the energy system, and also contributing to the European technological and data sovereignty. We have the industrial strategy. I think that's very important also for competitiveness of our industry. And one of the goals is to scale up manufacturing of wind turbines, for examples, and have also in mind that these should be made in Europe. Now, the Digitalization of Energy Action Plan will provide a new momentum for the alignment of the digital and the energy strategies, and that's what we are looking forward to, and that is what we are discussing here in these workshops. Now, I will not go into details here, but you will have access to my slides afterwards. we try to highlight a bit I've said what are the communications, what are the acts that we have, the Commission is planning or having in the process, in the pipe. But there are implications for the sector, for the energy sector. So the Data Governance Act will, for example, facilitate reuse of sensitive publicly held data under clear conditions, or put certain obligations to foster trust in neutral data intermediaries, because we'll get data intermediaries now on the energy data marketplaces. Data Act, the key objective is to ensure that a wider range of players can benefit from data use and that the distribution is fair. I mean, that's a very important point, the fair distribution, and also to facilitate the use of commercially held data for public interest. It's not only business, there's also public interest that is important. So that gives you a bit of an idea. This is not just theory on data, but this is important and relevant for the energy sector. I mean, looking at the time, just very quick, you see certain benefits for sharing energy data, but you see also challenges. I mean, benefits are probably pretty clear for you. So I would just focus now on the challenges. We have a certain reluctance of businesses to share data. Security, competition concerns are very important, and a general lack of trust. So we have to work against that. We also have a legacy barrier. So there's limited access to market for new services in terms of the legacy. We have to include the legacy and see how we can modernize access. And we see a certain fragmentation. We see a limited adherence to commonly agreed standards and interoperability. So I think that's a key point for making us able to access all the data we have. The Commission is supporting many things related to the digitalization of energy already. And I just would like to mention here the activities we had already under Horizon 2020 together, that we managed together with DG ENA. All this is together, Connect and ENA. So what we did there on large scale piloting, quite a large initiative for 60 million euro. We are working on that now also in Cluster 5. This is of Horizon Europe. And we have had quite some investment of 76 million euros on related in a broad sense to the energy data space, and we will see projects starting soon on that. In Horizon Europe Cluster 4, the industrial and digital part and space, we are often having energy as a use case for the digital technologies, and I think that paves the ground for the new technologies coming into what we want to do in energy in the future. In Digital Europe, we plan to look at the deployment at a deployment action for the energy data space. And we are also under the Connecting Europe facility looking at operational digital platforms for the energy sector and also at energy efficient cloud edge infrastructure. So that gives you a feeling of investments, obviously all linked into the light blue ones, which describe basically what we do on the policy and standardization side. Final slide, we want to go towards interoperable data spaces. So there are some documents which are quite good as background. There is the Bridge Data Working Group document. There is the document from Gaia-X on the energy data space. And that one I would like to highlight in particular, there's the OpenDEI. That's one of our coordination and support action document on design principles for data spaces, and that cuts across sectors. So they are looking at common design principles for agriculture, health, energy, and manufacturing. So they look already across, and energy is one of the ones they are looking at. So I think that's quite an interesting document when it comes to sharing across sectors. And the particular good example for sharing across sectors is the use case we have depicted here on the right-hand side. That is the visionary use case for sector coupling. When you look at the optimization of renewable energy production and usage, some of this will be addressed in the workshop on Friday when it comes to electromobility. And there we are looking in particular at the efficient integration of renewable energies, but then in two major areas in bidirectional EV charging. Bidirectional means using the battery as well, for example, for your household appliance at times when you don't need your electric vehicle, or smart homes and buildings. So this connection. So we see that as the most visionary use case for our digital enablers, the interoperable sectoral data spaces, cloud edge infrastructures, more smart IoT concepts like swarm computing, and also artificial intelligence. So that gives you an overview, and I'm very much looking forward to the 5 workshops, the one in particular this week already on data and on the cross-sector data sharing, and then we continue with 3 more, and Vincent has already given you a good overview of that. So with that, I would like to wish you a good workshop today, and I'm very much looking forward to this series and then to the digitalization of energy action plan. Thank you very much.
I think we pass the floor to you, Torsten, but you're muted.
Yes, I thought I'm done. I'm done. Huh?
Yeah, sure. I think it's for Torsten, but you're muted, so we can't hear you, Torsten. No, we can't hear you.
Torsten, das klappt nicht.
I'm turning to the colleagues who are in charge of organizing this, if they could give Torsten the access and the rights to speak. You can see your video, so you're a panelist. You just need to unmute.
From the panel here, I see that Torsten is unmuted, so I'm not sure what the...
So it might be a problem with your mic, Torsten. I would suggest that you unplug your mic and you speak directly in the computer. You unplugged it already. Yeah. No, we can't hear you, unfortunately.
One, two, three, test.
Yeah, that works. Bravo.
Okay, now it's better. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you very well, thanks.
Okay, perfect. So now I just have to, let me see where my presentation is. And now you should also see my presentation.
We can see it.
Does this work?
Yeah,
perfect. Okay, sorry for the trouble, but it was a little bit, I don't know what happened. So thank you very much, Max and Vincent, to have me today. I will briefly summarize what we have done in the already mentioned CSA OpenDI on design principles for data spaces. So Max was introducing this joint endeavor, and I'm also happy to have the second panelist with me, Douwe Liklema from Innopay, because Douwe was and is the editor of this paper. And therefore, Douwe, feel free to compliment whenever I'm talking. But first of all, I want to start also to add on what Max explained. I think we have a to-do list on data spaces. Max already summarized it very well. So we have the trust topic. We have trust as the basis of data spaces. There are certain technological elements to be dealt with. Identity management, certification of components, for instance. Security was already mentioned, also an ecosystem or the ecosystem of data, being able to explain, find and understand data. Then, of course, we are talking about interoperability, and in this regard, immediately standards come into play. And then, of course, value-adding topics like processing data, remote execution. These are tasks that can be solved easier with any kind of apps or programs to be used. And then finally, also mentioned by Max, the topic of data markets, which is important. So the question then is how to bring trust into data ecosystems. Participants in a data space need to take an informed decision about the trustworthiness of partners and components to use. And this is then a question of plug in or not to plug in. Just two sentences on international data spaces. So we are a non-for-profit association where we are active since 5+ years, so established in 2016. And we are working and have worked intensively on this topic of unlimited interoperability. So in the reference architecture model of IDSA, we see the information model and the propose and the connector, the IDS connector, as crucial elements to enable the semantic data descriptions. Then the second topic, it is directly related to data sovereignty. It's the trust topic, trust between different security domains. So we are here offering certified comprehensive security functions, providing a maximum level of trust. And then also the topic of governance. We are talking about usage control, about enforcement of usage constraints for data flows. And this is then finally an end-to-end secure data supply chain. So at the moment, we see a lot of organizational rules and legal contracts, but our vision is, or we already observe this, that these are more and more technically enforced. And then finally, what are these the core pillars, the 5 offerings of IDSA? Well, as I said, the reference architecture which delivers the open standard, the certification scheme for the third-party conformity, the rule book. This is also important because it is also needed that it is described in a comprehensive way how, for instance, a reference architecture could be implemented. This is done by our rule book in the 1.1 version. Also, please, for those who are interested, open source, the IDSG repository at GitHub is the main source to see the IDS landscape or the data spaces landscape with currently 27 repositories. And then also use cases who are experimenting. This is our adoption accelerator. So then in summary, we have this triangle, the reference architecture.
Yeah. Torsten, sorry, we are still on your cover slide. So if you want to put in full presentation, we would be able to see the slides.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Sorry, you should have said this. Let me just see. What can you see now?
We can still see your cover slide, nothing else.
Oh, that's bad. Sorry for this. So how can we change this?
Now we can see your triangle. But if you put...
okay, perfect.
Yeah. Perhaps
so,
you can
sorry for this. Sorry for this. I thought it's a little bit tricky because I'm using the browser and not the app, because the browser, the app didn't allow me to be panelist. So it was that you cannot hear me. But okay, so now I'm talking about this triangle of the reference architecture, certification scheme, and the open source repository, which you see here on the left side. And then maybe when we are coming to the use cases, I want to mention one use case of one of our member, Technica, from the Basque country. It is an offshore wind energy use case, which is has comprehensively implemented the IDS reference architecture. So coming now to the design principles of data spaces, which have been which have been mentioned by Max Lemko already. So what we did is in the last year, there was a task force within this OpenDI project. The task force was running for some 3 to 4 months in the last year. 40 organizations were involved and more than 27 EU projects, innovation actions, and research and innovation actions with hundreds of companies involved. And well, in a sequel of very intensive workshops, these experts gathered and finally came up with some additional proposals to, well, have a synthesis on building blocks for data spaces, which are divided in 3 topics. So we already heard from Max and also from you, Vincent, that the infrastructure is an important asset. And this infrastructure is not an infrastructure as we know it, consisting of hardware. It is a soft or virtual infrastructure, focusing on interoperability, on trust, on data value, and also on governance. And we have on the one hand side the orange building blocks, the technical building blocks, and then the green ones. These are governance building blocks. And the question is, how can participants interact in and between data spaces? So which solutions are there, which are neutral, and the general building blocks that are harmonized for each data space. And of course, not all blocks are obligatory to each data space. As you, Vincent, also rightly said, and Max also elaborated on this, there are certain differences, of course, in the domains and industries, but the overall goal is on a top level to have a common understanding and a common design principle to connect data spaces from different domains. Because at the very end, data spaces only unleash their full value if data sharing is possible cross-industry, cross-domain. And then well, there are certain technologies, there are certain topics, as I mentioned already, for instance, on the data interoperability sphere, on data sovereignty and trust, and on data value creation. And this is partly already described in the existing paper, Design Principles for Data Spaces of the OpenDI CSA, but there's also a second iteration of this task force. The task force is called Data Sharing Spaces. It just started, and for those of you who are interested, please connect to my colleague Silvia Castelvi, who is the manager of this task force. We are happy to include more experts, especially from the energy domain. And also to give you a little bit of an overview what we need additionally. Well, we are working since a couple of weeks or months strongly towards this common framework for data spaces, because as you can see here, and as it was also mentioned by Max, there are already a lot of organizations working on this virtual or soft infrastructure, just to mention Gaia-X, BDVA, us in IDSA, but also Zitra with their experience in rulebooks, the MyData operators, the data sharing coalition from the Netherlands, and also Fireware with their work on data spaces. This is non-exhaustive, but these are important organizations, and what is now needed and what we are working on is a common data space framework. And just to mention finally, also recently, 3 or 4 months ago, these 4 organizations, the big, I would say, initiatives on data spaces, just formed the Data Spaces Business Alliance, which is a coalition really to work and to fusion their achievements and their reference architecture model. This is an ongoing activity, and I think, Douwe, with your intervention, you can just complement on this and maybe give us a little bit more detailed about what is currently done in this mapping of the data spaces architecture. So this is it from my side. Thank you very much, and sorry for the troubles with my presentation. Back to you, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Torsten. I think the floor is now back to Douwe. will intervene and give her point of view. I hope Dawi was able to connect.
Yes, I'm here, and I am now sharing my screen. I hope, is something happening?
We can see your full screen. It's maybe not what you want to show. We don't see slides.
No, let me get
It's
here.
more a chat box now.
Stop sharing. Let me see. Nou ja, thought I had practiced it. This is a bit. Yeah. I share again. Microsoft PowerPoint. It's not a program I use very often, as you see. Is it better again?
Yeah,
It's again full.
Yeah,
it's a full screen, but it works. It works. Yeah. Okay.
It's not full screen. Now you will have to change slide on your hand.
Yeah. No, but I see it here. Yeah, right. It works. Yeah. Thanks everybody for the great introductions of all of you, and I'm going to share a bit on the whole vision and making it practical from the use case point of view. Looking at the time, it's about the energy system, and the way we look at it is that we are moving from a one-to-many system to a many-to-many system, and such a many-to-many system for the transition requires many-to-many data exchange. And I already heard in the previous presentations about that we need data exchange frameworks and all of that, but it's all about many-to-many in such a way that there is data sovereignty and that actors remain in control of their data. And the whole it's now a matter of creating this, because if we don't do this, then we will create data silos, and the whole network, the energy grid, will become unstable. So here's another visualization, so that we are looking for an energy exchange domain, which also can be also seen as an energy data space. But for us, the sum of all the use cases sum of all interoperable use cases are, of course, form a data space. Here you see the conceptual evolution of data sharing. On the left, we have bilateral data sharing, which is the world we come from, where every connection is a bilateral activity. And then there is the more centralized platform-driven approach. And today, I think, and also in the vision of all of us here in Europe, we are seeking for these ecosystems and create a multi-stakeholder environment where you can really create this many-to-many in such a way that data is under control of the persons and companies and IoT devices and everything. And you can share on a permission basis, but also share across boundaries in a unified, easy, and secure way. And that's done through these schemes or trust framework, as mentioned before. Here we also, and now I'm focusing a bit more on what we do in the Netherlands for this. We work there also on the similar vision, all derived from the European data strategy, and is all defined in the Dutch digitalization strategy. And then there is a particular section on data sharing, and already for a couple of years we are working on this in the Netherlands. And the major initiative is the Data Sharing Coalition. It has already been mentioned, and in 2019, after a policy research, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs asked the market to organize itself to come to data sharing, cross-sectoral data sharing, and to really go implement these principles of data sovereignty and interoperability. And so it happened, we are now 3 years later, or it started in 2020. So we are 2 years on our ways, and we have now more than 55 parties willing to work on this data and acknowledging the importance of this harmonized data sharing and the need to create common principles, common standards, common legal rules, common operational rules, and to come to some harmonization in such a way that everybody can do his own things, but the kind of create the minimum conditions for interoperability. And out of that research came the 9 building blocks, and also in Torsten's slide you also saw already 9 blocks. It's just a full scope list of topics which need to be covered in order to create data sharing. It is best practice from the last 20 years of work we did also in the payment and digital identity transaction field, which are of course high trust environment, and so this is really about creating agreements and standardizing not only on technical things but also on legal and operational and functional things. This whole data sharing coalition of these 55 parties are really geared towards use cases. Use cases is the heart of this, and the whole process is set up with a governance, which you see here, is to create learnings and to incorporate them and to generalize them into actionable knowledge. And that is what we are doing and have been doing in the past 2 years, and we will be continuing in the years to come, is to create these use cases and every time reuse knowledge from previous use cases into new use cases, and then improving and building and documenting this knowledge every time and again. So far we have been we have created some deliverables which can be found on the website of the data sharing coalition.eu. We found things like a use case playbook, also a use case blueprint, and last but not least, there is a use case implementation guide, and that is very concrete guidance to create certain use cases, because there are different sort of use cases, machine to machines, but there is also a use case where there is a person involved with a transaction and a redirect. And the idea is the coming years to expand these type of knowledge and documents to really make it practical, because we all have the vision and the whole grand design of the data spaces, but a data space without use cases is not a data space. So in any scenario, we have to go really bottom up as well with this, but have some really strong preconditions about interoperability and about trust and about the standardization. And that is proven a step-by-step approach. But if you take with high frequency, small steps every day, then in the end you end up with quite a journey. So examples of use cases this coalition is working upon are a few. One of them is human trafficking, so data sharing to detect human trafficking. There is also agricultural IT data, but of course there's also energy data spaces. There is one for battery containers for inland barging vessels, and there is also the one on green loans, and that's the one which I'm going to finalize my presentation with. It is a use case where a homeowner can share his data from his smart meter towards his financial institution to create a loan for improving the building, the house, for sustainability. And so what the two main actors here are a network of financial institutions who offer these mortgages, and the other side is the collaborative of DSOs who service all these smart meters. And we can do this because we have smart meter adoption, of course, in the Netherlands. But here we see a very nice use case where smart meter data is being brought into the financial system under the control of the rightful owner of this data, which is also the consumer. It's also the, of course, the DSO, but the consumer is here clearly involved. And so here you see the flow that the consumer gets a message from the financial institution, and there is a call to action in that message, and the consumer starts the authentication, identification, and authorization of the data towards the financial institution. And that is illustrated also here, where you see the 9 blocks again. And in this particular use case, a lot of attention went through these identification, authentication, and authorization, and less to the other blocks. And so what I want to say here is that depending on the use case, there will be more attention needed to certain areas of this data sharing. And so it's really use case specific, but in every choice, there are clear do's and don'ts in terms of preserving the overall vision of creating this interoperable data space vision. I'm really very happy with the workshop today and the topic which is on the table, because I strongly feel that this is the future, the right way to go, and that we really are on the right way to find and innovate this different paradigm, and the energy world, which is decentralizing, is really a great environment for do this. So thank you for that, and this ends my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. It's extremely interesting and very relevant, of course, for the preparation of our action plan. And I would like to thank Torsten as well. That this gives the basic principles that are important to be aware of. And I propose that we continue with discussions on use cases. And I'm asking Philip Alexander to now take the floor. He will be moderating the session on best practices and use cases, where we've got 4 speakers.
Yes, good morning from Copenhagen. I hope you can hear me all.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Wonderful. And welcome to the first panel. It's very nice to be on the workshop. And as you've already seen, the topic of digitalization is a very, very broad one. So from me, as I've been asked to give some introductory remarks, I will put them first and share my slides here. I hope you can see them. Some words, very, very good. Some words from Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure. Many of these things you will already have seen before, but for me it was very important to stress some of the aspects here for also with regard of best practice, and we will come back to some of those in the discussion. Digitalization, very important as a foundation for green transition innovation. You all know that. We've been talking about that a lot of times. And then also from our side, integration of all sectors is very, very important. So we should look upon that this works not only in the energy sector, but of course for all sectors. Then from CSEI would be, once more, can you hear me? Yes. Then very important from CSEI is the financial implications. So digitalization and cross-sectoral cooperation regarding data can secure efficiency in investments in infrastructure and maintain security of supply. So for the energy sector, a very, very important argument. Then from us again, economic and regulatory framework across different policy streams is important. So as we're talking about different sectors, we've seen that in the beginning, how many organizations, sectors and so on are involved here. So it's very, very important that this is secured across policy streams. Then from our perspective, energy system of the future needs to be affordable, secure, and competitive, very important. And then something else which we have been hearing about a lot, trust is very, very central. we see important decentral organization of these data spaces. The governance aspects, which I will come back to later, is very important. And then this will also enable innovation. Open data principle and creation of common rules, important, and this leads to integration of new actors and, of course, interoperability to shape new business models, innovation, and to monetize flexibility. So from silo, which also can mean from different sectors and parts of different sectors, to spaces, to have that broader. We have been hearing cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important, and from our side, also important further research and innovation activities are very much essential to reach the goals here. We see the European Commission as the driver and the enabler for this development, actually, and that would also be my last point to switch to the panel. In the panel, and now I have to see how I get back to how I stop sharing my slides. I cannot really see that here. So to the panel, we are going to start with Martine Courrier. I don't know if you're there, Martine. Are you there, Martine? The first panelist. Vincent, do you see her?
I think she was on the list.
Yeah, because then maybe Kalle Cook is there.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Wonderful. Then we would start the panel with Kalle. And Kalle has worked for the Estonian electricity and gas transmission system operator Elering since 2010. If that's right, he's a senior advisor on the digitalization, and he's an economist, which of course, from a CSEI perspective, is very, very important to include in this discussion. So Kalle, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I will do this short introductory presentation then. So you should be seeing my slides now. And going to full slide
Yes,
as well.
can see them.
Perfect. Seems to be a bit slow, but it should be fine now. So indeed, everything is right, what you said about me. I've been working in the domain for 10 years now, but my background really is non-energy. Let me tell you a brief story here, starting with a provocative title: Is evolutionary approach sufficient? By saying that, I don't think that we should be like revolutionary here, but still we need a kick to move faster ahead, because we have been talking on the topics for years and years now, and most of us are really into the subject and have been trying to push it. But still, can we do something further? And it's very positive that we see that also the Commission is taking a series of actions to move it forward. We started at Elering then building a data hub for metering data years ago, 10 years ago. But next to it, we also built this S-Tweet concept. So the S-Tweet is for a data exchange platform. What I'm trying to explain here is the platform-based approach to interoperability, and flexibility is one major topic there, the energy flexibility we mean here. So the concept of S-Tweet, or the data exchange platform in general, is to connect any party to enable a distributed data exchange. So the platform itself does not collect and store the data. We took this and we are using this internally for metering data, mostly still electricity and gas, but it could work for any data, obviously. And we tried to build a European alliance based on this a couple of years ago, just before the COVID kicked in. But this initiative has stuck for several reasons. And then we took these to many European projects. For example, EU Sysflex project, first major project for me and Elering. And we developed the idea further and tried to see how to implement it on European scale. And this project is finishing right now, and we were proposing a customer-centric conceptual data exchange model. So customer-centric, I think that's the first keyword. We need to start from there. Everything we do, even if we are TSO or DSO or supplier or whoever, we need to keep the customer interest in mind. And having said that, the aim is not a single data platform, but we really need to ensure the interoperability of different platforms and even different solutions behind the platform solutions. Maybe three major use cases here we demonstrated in the project. First, for cross-border data exchange. So just to demonstrate how a person, a resident of one country, could access their metering data in their own country, but also in another country, and maybe even using then a data hub or data platform of another country. Also, we demonstrated cross-sector data exchange. What do we mean with that? So we simply connected to different data sources, in this case, metering data hub and a building register together, made the combined data available to the data users, to the persons interested in the data. One figure here is just to demonstrate one way to do that. You can connect together two different data platforms, in this case, Elering's SFeed and SOE's ECP platform. So the data user or data provider should not really be concerned about to which platform they are connected, but it should be sufficient on the European scale if they're connected to one platform. And any other person connected to any other platform has the access to this data. And the third use case is to demonstrate the flexibility trading. So we built the flexibility platform as a market platform, different processes, but again, using the data exchange platform for any data exchange. And taking this further, we also have been pushing the idea in the Bridge initiative. So last year we came out with this data exchange reference architecture. This year, very soon, we are updating the reference architecture, so there will be a new release of it, 2.0, if you wish. But what is also important that we carry on with a governance layer of the approach, and this is what we are doing or have in mind to do in the OneNet project, another Horizon project. But what we also really need is practical demos or practical pilots, implementations of this concept, but also any other concepts we already have heard about earlier this morning, and we'll probably see many others later. So this is where we started, this is where we are, and this is where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalle, for that introduction to what you've been doing. I can see in the chat that Martine is now on. Wonderful.
So I'm here, but yeah, I'm here, but I am not sure I have the. So I was not able. Sorry for that, to have the video. So you will have to hear me, but not to see me. Very sorry for that.
But it's interesting. I mean, again, we're talking about digitalization, right? And we still have these issues. I just wanted to introduce you very shortly. You're a digital users director of Électricité de France, EDF, and a position you have been having since 2019. And you're also a member of Gaia-X board of directors, which we've been hearing a lot about this project before. And therefore, I think it's extremely interesting to hear what you have to say. Martine, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm so sorry for all the technical points. Well, just to say that, so first, two sentences related to Gaia-X. You know, it's quite a young initiative because it was born 2 years ago with 22 founding members, so French and German at the beginning, but now it has a very big and rapid expansion. And I'm very happy to tell you that now the association has more than 303 and 30 members, and coming from all around Europe and also across Europe. And we have a lot of large companies, SME, academic startups, and so that's quite amazing. And with a lot of work is being done there. And the real point is to have an infrastructure ecosystem based on, I have already heard this point this morning a lot of times, so based on trust and on sovereignty, and that's a really key point. And upon this trust and sovereignty, we have to build data spaces. And I have done some work with a lot of companies related to energy data spaces. And we have so more than 20 companies that are gathered, and they work on this topics related to energy, because as you know, it's really important. And of course, for us, IDSA, energy transition is key. And we have, and I really believe that, and you have already said that in fact, on the next decade, we'll have the energy transition, and we'll help the energy transition through the digitalization. That's really a key point. We have so all these 20 companies that are working together to have a lot of use cases. The key point, as you already have said, use cases, and thanks to also, I'm very happy to say that we have formed consortium, and specific projects, and we are very honored that we, as EDF, we are now part of 3 consortiums that were selected by you, so the European Commission, to form energy data spaces. And we have 3 projects now that are, they are starting, and 3 projects named Omega-X, Enershare, and Data Cellar, respectively coordinated by Atos Engineering and RENA. And these 3 projects will be so the start of 3 energy data spaces projects. And the main point, and we will have to speak on that later on, main point is really on the big point related to interoperability and building common blocks. And you have already said that, but the point is to come from I would say theory to pragmatic and to reality, because we have to build. It's not only work on paper, but we have to build some real things, because it's really key. So third point I wanted to stress is use cases, and what are our topics. So we have many topics, and you may imagine, but I wanted to put the focus on some of the use cases. We have some points related to renewable, because of course renewable is a key topic, and the point is to optimize operation and maintenance, and we have to increase energy systems availability, we have to reduce costs, and we have also to reduce CO2 footprint. We have also big use cases related to electromobility, because we have to ease and scale up existing services, and we have also to build innovative services. Example, cross-border self-consumption of renewable energy. We have to increase this incredible important point of electromobility. And we have also other use cases related to local energy community. to increase and to optimize overall performance. Overall, that means that we have to take into account all vectors and not one vector independent from the other. So in that point, we have well, this main use cases, and we are currently working, and it won't you will have no surprise because we are also EDF. We are currently working on use cases related to nuclear. So I wanted to emphasize that point, and perhaps later on we'll have to do the discussion about what means trust. Because the point is really that so what is trust, and we have a good trust framework within Gaia-X, and also key points related to labels. But perhaps I can, I can explain you more on that point later on. So I wanted again to thank so the European Commission, because in fact you have launched this call building the European and energy data spaces, and with that we'll work really to make dream a reality, and we have really to make dream reality because it is our aim. Thank you for that.
Very good. Thank you for this, Martine, and we will get back to especially I already have on my list trust and government, so we'll get back to that in the discussion. The next speaker is Klaas Hommes. I hope he is there. Yes, I can see you.
Yeah.
And perfect, and I can hear you. You're the director of Beheerder Afsprakenstelsel. I don't know if I've said this correctly. With my original German background, and you're a business developer at Tenet working on digitalization. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Philip. Indeed, I'm the CEO of the framework administrator, the BAS, we call it, the Beheerder Afsprakenstelsel. And indeed, we try to make the word Afsprakenstelsel a European word, because we would like that very much as Dutch, of course. But let's be honest, it's about ecosystems, like Douwe mentioned, and also Max already mentioned. It's about to come up to ecosystems. So that's what we are doing in the Netherlands at this moment. Currently, we are really working towards an energy data framework. So I put up a set of slides. I hope you can see them now. We are indeed going to this exchange of energy data, which requires a lot of things that already have been said. So we are really approaching an ecosystem to make sure that the data is spread in the right way and on the right conditions. So we started with enabling a regulatory framework. So that's also where you have Lars Meindert later on in the program from the Ministry of Economic Affairs. We will have a new energy bill in the Netherlands. That was one of the first things to do. And then, of course, the IT structure supporting the exchange of data already mentioned. The preconditions is that we have a secure IT system, of course. We also need to be very aware of the privacy and all that kind of things. And then, of course, the inclusive and effective market facilitation, where all parties can say their part and play a role. Because that's very important for us as we look at the current system in the Netherlands. We see that the current system is based on more or less not involving all parties. A lot of new parties come up, like aggregators, price comparison companies, flexibility providers, and all that kind of parties. And they also need to have a possibility to raise their voice on how to exchange energy data and how to involve consumers, because this is all related to energy transition, of course, at the end. And we need to have to set up a proper framework for this. So this was all the things that we took on board when we started with this. So we started this new concept where we call it, indeed, as you say, the Afsprakenstelsel. We used also the 9 building blocks which Douwe presented already before to come up with this frameworks. I will not read out all the slides because we don't have sufficient time, I guess, but they will be sent afterwards, I hope, so everyone can read it. Because I think it's really important to also see what's on these slides. It tells you more about how we approached it. Because another thing that I would like to emphasize on now is that we are really going to do it in the Netherlands. We are really going live with this ecosystem. On the 1st of April, we will go live and we'll have set up this complete framework. based on what's on this on these slides. So what you can see then is,
sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. There's somebody in the chat saying if you could use the presentation mode, because
Of
it's
course.
really, the slides are very small, so maybe we could.
So better?
Now it's even smaller, because it's the one you see like.
I hope it will. I have to.
No, you have to change the monitor. Yes.
So now it's working, I guess. Yeah. Can you see it?
No.
No.
Now the sharing is stopped, I see.
Sorry to have interrupted you. It's always,
Yes.
try again. Yeah, now it's there.
Now it's there?
It's a little bit bigger. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. But that's also the reason, of course, why we will send out the slides afterwards. Then you can see them, of course, because I think that's better for
Very good.
everyone
Thank you.
to see it.
Yes. Thank you.
Let's go to the next one. So these are the building blocks. This is actually the framework which we would like to set up. In the past, we have a market facilitation forum, and we have the so-called beheerder of the afsprakenstelsel, which I will head. So we have two things. We have the forum where all the parties come together and can talk about the so-called afspraken, so the agreements on how to exchange data. All parties which have things on the which work with energy data, with consumer data, can be connected to this market facilitation forum, so they can take part of it and come to agreements on how to deal with this. So also what also was already mentioned before, how to make sure that the customer is identified on the right way, and the data is shared in a proper way. So also the consumer organizations will take place in this. They can also be there, because that's one of the most important things that we thought in the Netherlands would be very useful to have also a very good place for the consumers in this place. And on the other hand, you have an independent, a so-called beheerder, so-called a framework administrator, who can really make sure that all the things that have been dealt with in the market facilitation forum are worked out in a proper way, will lead to a good legislation, good rules, and also look after it, that's been kept on. So we will introduce then the data permission exchange layer to centralize and standardize data. This is quite maybe a little bit complicated picture, which in the next picture you can see is more simplified, just to make sure that everyone understands what we are up to. So we have the data source layer, it's on the bottom. All the data sources will be there. We don't have, for example, like Elring, like Kalle just mentioned, a data hub. Now we have this decentralized data sources, which will all be together there and will all be connected via this data exchange layer. And we will have a so-called access layer. And there you see on the right hand, you see on the screen is this data governance entity and the framework administrator, to make sure that all these things are done in a proper way. And then you can also see a little bit more of how this then works out. You can see the data source layer. It consists of different data sources. For example, one of the data sources is how there the DSOs, also like Kalle mentioned, in the European way. We would like to really stress out that this is also cross-sectoral data sharing possibilities giving. And of course, other sources are the metering companies like we have in the Netherlands for the big end consumers. But also other sources can be connected to this system. For example, the data sources which contain information of what's behind the meter, or data sources on more or less details of persons who live in certain places. And then we will go to the data exchange layer, and there, of course, the authentication is a very important one. So that data is only exchanged based on this authentication identification of the customers. And of course, there is similar to what it is in S-Suite, the event log. So at the end, all consumers can see who has who has tried to approach data, and who has permission for what data, and who has used what data. And of course, then you have the access layer with portals and applications. And one of the most important things is, and that was already mentioned also by Douwe this morning, that we would like to have very much a use case way of working. So what we are going to do is we ask all the participants in the Market Facilitation Forum to come up with their use cases, so we can really stress this out on a use case based system. So we will start with data sharing based on use cases, but of course we also have the current things are working, like the allocation and reconciliation processes, which are already there in the market in the Netherlands, which we will also serve. So it's very important for us to build this ecosystem with all parties involved. And as I said, we will go live at the 1st of April with this complete system. We are now really make sure that everyone is on board and everyone is attending this Market Facilitation Forum. And also the administrator is already founded. So I hope to have shown you that it's really possible in Europe to come up with these solutions and to really build an ecosystem on this. Not based on the data hub like Elring did, but we are doing it with decentralized sources. And we hope also that we can really move quickly to cross-sectoral data exchange as well. So thank you for your attention. Hope that it was useful, this.
Thank you very much, Klaas. Very, very useful. And I think we will come back to the governance issue, as both you and Martin have already mentioned that. And we have different models, I think, here in the panel. But let me welcome Alberto Abella to this session. He is, as he says himself, a data modeling expert and technical evangelist at Fireware Foundation. So very welcome here. You're an engineer and you have a PhD on the topic of modeling of the social and economic impact of open data and smart cities ecosystems. So please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, do you hear me well and see my slide full screen? So
yes.
Glad to overcome the technical problems. So thank you very much. I'm quite happy to be here. So I'm also very happy for some of the of the survey that was presented. I don't remember if it was Mr. Barut or Mr. Lemke, about what are the main concerns for the data interchange, because the main concern was the interoperability, which is something that is not usually paid the attention that it really requires. So we are now, from my point of view, is that in a challenge, because the digital markets are moving to a speed that we are not capable to deal with in terms of interoperability. So we have been talking about trusted interchange of data. There has to be some kind of economic transaction. The governance is relevant, but we are taking for granted that interoperability is in place, which is something that I cannot commit with that statement. So let me show you what's happening right now. Is that whenever the European Union is investing heavily in a shared project, we are creating new ways of managing energy, creating new data. There are some emerging markets appearing. And from the standardization point of view, to achieve interoperability, it's taking some months or even some months or years that the standardization bodies takes these new markets into the standards, and then they take some 1-2 years minimum to provide an actual standard. I guess if we are going to move at digital market speed, I guess we have a problem here. So what we are suggesting and what we want to present today is an Agile standardization initiative in which we take contact direct with the research projects, with emerging markets, and in a matter of weeks, we have some, not a full standardization, because this is not the goal, but something that can help the developers to start working. And we are able to deliver this kind of standards in a matter of weeks or in a matter of days. So therefore, instead of having, let's say, de facto standards provided by the main agents, either European or external, then you could have something which is on the market for being used, okay? And for and for feeding the standardization bodies to create an actual standard, but based on something which is actually working. So the smart data programs that I'm managing is collaborative effort between 4 organizations and more than 80 collaborative organizations to create standardized data models, multi-sector, because it's something which has been stressed out across the panelists. So energy is no longer isolated. So because we have very environmental impacts, we are managing energy for water supply, for managing cities, for everything. And there are interactions between the energy and many other sectors. Smart Data Models is an initiative of Agile standardization and giving free and open license data models. And possibly the most important is not based on, let's say, we are not inventing anything, but based on actual use cases. So if you don't have a use case, then we are not there. Okay, and these are the links for accessing. The smartdatamodels.org is the main website for providing you with, let's say, with the last updates. And there's a repository with around 800 data models in GitHub. And what are, let's say, the differential factors? We have one single source of truth with the technical details. So the description and the technical details are in a very same file. We publicate this in a matter of minutes. So since we have agreed this file to a full documented specification in 6 languages is a matter of 50 minutes, around that. We are based on actual use cases, so we are not creating a standard and checking if the market is going to adopt it. No, on the other way around, we take something which is actually working and create a generalized standard based on that. Okay, or in the case that there is also already an open and adopted standard, we just map it and that's all. So we are not here for inventing anything. And what happens with this? Whenever there is a versioning, because the market is changing and it's changing at a dramatic speed, we create new versions. So we can create a new version in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks or in a matter of days. It is not a big deal for us. And what the results of Agile standardization at that point is that we can be at market speed. And we are based mostly in the innovation projects of the Europe, but we have a global approach. In fact, the members of the Smart Data Models are the Fiverr Foundation, which is a German-based non-profit organization, IDSA, which is the Ministry of Home Affairs of India, TM Forum, which is the largest telco operators association in the world, and Open and Agile Smart Cities, which is an association of cities across the world, mostly in Europe and Asia. Okay, so we are not here for providing an alternative to classic standardization models. This is not our role. Our role is just to be much more agile and provide just with something which is very close to a standard, with not all the details and not all the consensus of the industry, but something that you can work on and you can claim to be interoperable because it's fully open license. So we are not imposing barriers to use it in the way that you want, to modify it and to share the modifications to customize you for your needs. So as a summary, I guess that the interoperability is really an issue. The survey was demonstrated that is the issue, the main issue, and we are here to help to the use cases into the energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and a very impressive presentation. I think coming from a country here in Denmark where Lego is actually a very known trademark, right? It's very, very important. I think, I mean, the substance of Lego is that you can actually combine every block you buy at Lego and it fits together. And I think this is a little bit also what you've been saying. I mean, that these things need to interoperate. But my first question to the panel, and I will try to keep the time as well, would a little bit be about the question of trust and the different ways of implementation and governance in the initiatives that you have presented. Because I mean, I would like to ask maybe Klaas first, very shortly. I mean, you have an intermediary in your organization, or you have organized it around an intermediary. I mean, how did that work, and where do you see actually the opportunity with that? we've been talking about how actors can enter here. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, it's about more or less about the governance. So we started the process to invite all parties on board and to have a more or less a chat with us. And one of the basics for this collaboration was trust. That's where we started to build upon. First among the TSOs and DSOs, and then with all the other market parties to come up to a certain level of trust to make sure that we had a good collaboration. And then we started with more or less the governance. It's more about the process than about the content. So and of course COVID ran into our business, and that was a bit unusual for us because we had to deal with this all these meetings which were all online. So we took the time to build up a good governance framework. And that's also what I presented in the slides. It's about the governance that we started with, and based on this governance, now we can build up on the content and can see, okay, how are we really going to deal with this? And then, of course, the new energy law comes in place, and that supports us very much in to build up this governance structure, because it's a governance structure which is also laid down in the new bill, in the new energy bill, and that makes it really strong. And now you can see all parties really would like to come on board and talk with us about this new framework and more or less about the rules and how to exchange data and how to exchange data in a secure way with the customer in the central space, because that's the most important of this whole new framework.
Okay, thank you. Before we come to Kelly, maybe Martin, because you mentioned this topic.
Yeah, I think it's really a key point. I wanted to tell you that different layers, and in fact, so within Gaia-X, we are building a trust and labeling framework, and so this is currently implemented and will be in place before summer. And upon this trust and labeling, so this trust framework, we are building several labels with different criteria, and we have 3 different labels, 1, 2, and 3. These labels are currently, there is a survey that is currently taking place to all the members to receive the comments to all the criteria that were decided. All those criteria are really precise, because you know there are, so it is on the website of Gaia-X since yesterday, so that's why it's quite new. But we have 68 criteria related to transparency, interoperability, portability, security, and also European sovereignty for the label 3, because on this label 3, there will be only European companies that will be able to have this level 3 label. So we have 68 criteria. We will have the comments on all the members, so the 330 members related to all those criteria, and at the end we'll have so I think beginning of April, we'll have all these criteria very well established. And if we manage to have all these criteria, and then to have technically the trust framework, then we have this layer of trust at the infrastructure system. But we need also to have trust at level of data. It was already mentioned. And we have to have trust and interoperability with a lot of building blocks. And I think that you're right, governance is a key point. I would say that, in fact, governance also brings trust. And we have to have those building blocks bringing trust, and related to identity, to data exchange, data models, to metadata catalogs, and so on. So we have, and I really want to, so we don't have time to move forward, but I wanted to say that for me, so on that point on trust and what are the key points, I think we have in fact 3 points. We have the governance, we have the operating model, and then we have the interoperability, and that are the 3 key points. And what I wanted to say also, that this kind of what we are having this morning, thanks to all of you guys of the European Commission, so guys and ladies, sorry, a lot of this. The point is really is that will help us to go together and to work together, and that's also a key point to try to work together.
Very good, thank you, Martin. And maybe Kalle, some words on your approach.
Yeah, thank you. So if we say trust, so trust by whom really? At least looking from our corner of Europe, when we established the Data Hub years ago, then it was just an agreement between the main stakeholders to set it up, and then only later it was actually regulated. So that was really not an issue. But what I see is the real issue is first the trust on European level. So we need to learn to trust each other across the country borders. And secondly, what I mentioned before, it's the customer perspective. So what we need is the trust of the customer. And I think we have made two quite important studies in past couple of years. One was to investigate the economic benefits of a European setup of a data platform or data hub. So the joint infrastructure on a European level, and there were clear benefits demonstrated. And the other was a study amongst many data users or data service providers, and there is a clear need from them. Many use cases, many value added were demonstrated by them. There is a clear request by those customers, and we should be now the ones who can provide to satisfy that need. And this is what we just need to make happen, not discuss anymore.
Thank you very much. I mean, the panel comes to an end far too early, I would say. I mean, I've been I would have liked to talk about scalability with you as well. But as we need to move on with the action plan, and I've been asked that by the European Commission, and in the discussion yesterday, it was very clear. I mean, if you have one important point or one most important recommendation for the action plan, and I would ask in very short 2 sentences per panelist, I would like to ask you what would that be? And Alberto, maybe I start with you.
What in 2 sentences? I know that others will say so. Interoperability is a big issue, and we have to adapt it to the digital market. We cannot keep on being in the same way. We cannot expect good results with a classical approach. Perfect. Martin?
Yeah, I would say that thanks to the call Eurozone Europe and energy data space, you have, there was a very big point on that call that saying that we need to have interoperability between the projects, and with, I think, on the action plan, there is really a need to again to stress on that point on interoperability, but there are also 2 other points. I wanted to say that the first is to share and to see what is the governance. So that's really a point that the European Commission will. So I think you will be able to help us on that. Because the digitalization in the energy action plan is so we have to move forward. And on that point, I think so really we have to work again to, so we have to work to interoperability, we have to work on the governance, and we have also to work on the operating model, because on the action plan, the operating model is also key. And the point is that, so that's well, I would say that, so I heard all discussions since this morning, and I think that we have a lot of very good initiatives. We within Gaia-X who are working with IDSA and BDVA on Fireway, so it was already mentioned to have this the Data Space Business Alliance, and I think that I would say that all the planets are quite aligned, and that means that there is a lot of work to do, but we see that all the people within Europe are going the same way and in the same direction. It's true for energy and also for the other sectors, but at least for energy. And really, we are in the good direction. But now the point is to have all of the projects and to go live and to work together, and also to, of course, there is things related to founding and so on. But the point is really there.
Thank you very much, Martin. Kalle, very short.
Thank you. What we really need now, I think, is some kind of orchestration on European level, probably from the Commission, indeed, because we have seen those many projects and initiatives, bottom-up initiatives, and these are really useful and providing the evidence. But what I also see that we are still running on the parallel tracks, often not meeting each other, sometimes even going in opposite directions. So we need some kind of centrally imposed orchestration, and I think this action plan is going towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Klaas?
I fully go with Kalle. We need orchestration from European Commission, but then I would like to emphasize that two things are quite important. One is already mentioned, interoperability, and the other one is please put the customer in the driver's seat, because we see a lot of initiatives where the customer is not involved, and that makes no sense in the energy transition. We all do this for the customer, and that's the only thing.
Perfect. Thank you very much to the panel. Very good discussion and inputs from you, and back to the European Commission.
Let me thank you also to the excellent discussion, all the members of the panel, the moderator, a lot of substance. We'll conclude on that at the end. And now just enjoy the break and start at 12 o'clock sharp, 11 o'clock sharp, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning.
Hi, Valerie.
Valerie, good morning.
Hello. Perfect. I see that all my panelists are here and the audio also seems to work.
Excellent. I think we have 2 more minutes, so give them time for the others to join. We'll come back. All right, so let me briefly start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rolf Rebenschneider. I'm from DG Connect, one of the co-organizers of the workshop, together with my colleagues from DG NL. And it's my honor to introduce briefly the next panel 2, evidence from national and European initiatives. We have heard something in the first panel about reference framework and building blocks, also partly from national initiatives. Now we want to hear about more of the lessons learned from national initiatives and European initiatives. And it's my honor to welcome Valerie Reif from the European University Institute, at the same time also working at the Florence School of Regulation. And I pass the floor to you, Valerie. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rolf, and thank you for the invitation. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this second panel discussion of today. It's my very big pleasure to moderate this expert panel on evidence from national and European initiatives. You already see the panelists. I will introduce them shortly. And as Rolf already said, we have heard about design principles for data sharing. We have heard about specific use cases. And now we take the opportunity to dive into experiences at the national level in the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and in the Basque region. And just some words on the structure of the panel. So each panelist will have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we will move to an open discussion. And I would just like to remind everybody to be mindful of time, also in the interest of a fruitful and also diverse discussion later on. So without further ado, I will introduce the first panelist. It is Henrik Madsen from Denmark. He is a professor in mathematical statistics at the Technical University of Denmark, also a professor at NTNU in Norway. His research interests, I found out, include the analysis and modeling of stochastic dynamic systems with applications both in the energy sector but also beyond. And I believe he will share some experience with us from an initiative called Center Denmark and also Smart Energy OS that was already mentioned this morning. Henrik, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I hope that you are able to see my screen.
Yes, we do.
Thanks. Thanks for the invitation, Rolf, and thanks for the nice introduction. So I will share some experience we have from our national center, which is a hub for national digitalization or data spaces. But it's not only national projects. We are also involved in bridge related projects and also in new Green Deal projects. So what I very much agree with what has been said. For instance, one of the main messages will also be a little bit provocatory. I very much agree with I think Kalle Cook from Ellering, which said that probably we cannot rely fully on an evolutionary approach. I definitely think we need disruptions. And one of the reasons for that is we are facing a transition to an energy system or weather-driven energy system where the intelligence has to be on the end user side. And that means that the flexibility, digitalization, use of data spaces is extremely important. In Center Denmark, our national hub for data spaces, we have demonstrated a lot of flexibility in water handling, swimming pools, charging of batteries, cooling houses, and so on. So one of the core principles we are using in our initiative on data spaces, but also algorithms, and we call it democracy, because I think trust and fairness and so on, transparency is also very, very important elements, as we have just heard in previous presentations. So what we do is we are using a temporal and spatial thinking. So we have aggregation on, in theory, all aggregation levels, from the appliance to buildings, districts, to city, to the country and the continent. And of course, for instance, a city is cities turns out to be very important players because they are important decision makers. As when the last session was ended, we also said that we should really allow the end users to have a big say here and a big influence, and I fully agree on that. Here we also need quite some disruptions. But most importantly, we need a coherency across different scales. What we think we need are an operating system for the energy system. That's what we have implemented, our National Center for Data Spaces, Center Denmark. And that has different layers, like you probably know the OSI layers from computers. But here we have a picture of our smart energy operating system, which are focusing a lot on the power systems with DSOs and TSOs, but actually it goes across the different vectors. But one of the most important elements, which I also discussed with the Commission and Peter Hermans and so on, is the concept of flexibility functions. Because what we have learned is that we cannot use conventional market thinking when we go close to the physics. When we are closer to the physics, we need to respect the dynamics, and we need to introduce the concept of local dynamic flexibility markets. And this is something we do by introducing what we call flexibility functions and a hierarchy of controllers which can be used to activate this flexibility. On the high level, we have a conventional market because that's maybe day ahead and for a big area like the Nord Pool area, Scandinavian market. But on a single feeder along the DSO, we will never believe in this type of things. Then we need definitely to have these flexibility functions. And this concept of flexibility functions and spatial and temporal thinking is exactly what we are implementing now in the National Center Denmark for data spaces. And we aim at establishing a trusted data sharing data space which put emphasis in empowering the end users in a way so they can provide flexibility without being subject to a lot of technical requirements, administrative burdens, procedure, and charges. So we think this is a very, very important aspect to have the user in a loop and provide smooth transition to the future. I can say, for instance, for my EV, I didn't buy a Tesla. I bought a European car, but I'm struggling with just smart charging. Even though I would like to charge at night, I want to be green and so on. It's a bit difficult, but I think that's something we should really enforce, that we can be smarter basically now. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Henrik, and thank you also for keeping the time. Many interesting elements already mentioned that we can pick up later in the discussion, But now I would like to immediately move to our second panelist, who is José Ormaech from the Basque region. He is the general manager of the Basque Energy Cluster. This is a non-profit organization. It has the mission to improve the competitiveness of in the Basque energy sector. And he has also been active in the EU-funded Horizon 2020 project Platoon. And I believe that this project is also related to the experience that he will be sharing with us. I think it has also already been mentioned by Thorsten this morning. So Jose, the floor is yours. You also have 5 minutes. And we can see your slides.
Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation and for giving us the opportunity to share some of the things we are developing in those projects I will mention and try to share the lessons we are getting from it. In fact, as you said, I'm here, although I work for the Basque Energy Cluster, but I am representing the Platoon project. This is a Horizon 2020, an initiative at the European level in which 20 companies and entities from different countries of Europe, we are collaborating. We started 2 years ago in this digital platform and analytic tools for energy project that is Platoon. We are in charge of the industrial dissemination activities, so that's why we are like sharing and showing around the main issues of Platoon. I will link in a couple of minutes with a regional initiative we are launching also in the Basque Country as a consequence or basing on the lessons and the technologies that are being developed in Platoon. Platoon in a nutshell, from the beginning, Platoon wanted to address 3 main challenges that have already been mentioned and by several of the previous speakers, so I'm not going to go into further detail. We all know what we say when we are talking about interoperability. One of the, I would say, starting key issues to be able to share data from between different companies and value chains. I will show you in a minute the pilots that are being developed in the project, and I will share this information. Data governance and security, very relevant in terms of making of solving all these issues around the data sovereignty and how companies can increase trust between them to share data. And finally, there is also a relevant part of Platoon that is addressing the toolboxes regarding the intelligence, the capabilities of analyzing data and getting useful information for the different companies at the different levels of the value chain. Of course, for the customers, but we are talking especially, or the companies that are involved are especially companies from the value chain that are the ones that we are representing. Maybe it's too small to be shared, but maybe you can see in the left side of the slide, that's the reference architecture that Platoon has developed these first 2 years of the project. So this is like the structure you can see in the bottom layer, the physical infrastructure and the data sources, the different data sources from the different pilots that will be developed in the project that are starting, in fact, being deployed right now. The interoperability layer that is responsible for transforming all those data collected by different data sources into something that can be managed by the different systems that will participate in the project. The interoperability layer that I have mentioned is quite relevant, and I will talk later, maybe during the discussion about the importance of these issues. The data management layer, in which this layer is in charge of overseeing the different data that are being fed into the system, and the scope of the different components of this layer is to provide a unified knowledge base in which the data collected and harmonized in the previous layer can be accessed through, in this case, semantic federated queries. That is one of the modules that are included in this architecture. The top layer is the intelligence, where all these data, all these analytical toolboxes are being integrated to be used in the different use cases. And finally, at the top, it's the marketplace. We have called that way this layer in which the information will be published, different types of data, different types of services that have been already worked out in the different layers will be here published. And that's the layer where pilots will make available the different data and services that could be shared with other pilots. In the right side of the slide, you can see the 7 pilots that are being deployed right now. They have already been defined as low-level use cases. You can see the detail of the different low-level use cases included in those pilots at generation, transmission, distribution, and also there is some relevant pilots at the customer level in different buildings, and one relevant also in the case of Rome as a smart city that has different sites where data will be generated and shared. And I will finish this opening statement by referring to this national regional experience we are having in the Basque Country, basing or taking advantage of the experience of some of the partners of Platoon that are also companies and research entities like Tecnalia in the Platoon project. We launched also 2 years ago a working group at the cluster level with companies and research centers focused mainly in the offshore wind value chain. We have an important number of companies supplying components, supplying systems, supplying technology for the wind turbines. So they were interested in increasing their access and their competitiveness through the access to data. So we are working in this local experience, developing tools like data lake architectures. We are also developing IDSA connectors to connect information between different layers. In fact, Thorsten Hulsmann has referred in his presentation to one of the applications that Techniker is developing inside this initiative. This DAEKIN is the official name of the initiative. So we are trying to implement at a regional level, obviously with some difficulties, not only from the technological point of view, but also in terms of the access to relevant data to be used and to be analyzed and to be worked out in this ecosystem. And maybe we can refer to those issues later in the discussion. So I stop here with this first statement.
Thank you very much, Jose, and also thanks to you for keeping the time. I will immediately move to the third panelist, who is Lars Meindert from the Netherlands. He is a senior policy officer in the field of energy regulation and markets at the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. We've already heard from the Dutch experience, but it will be complemented with his view. He has extensive experience when it comes to competition policy, sector regulation and competitiveness. And interestingly, he's also a member of the team that is preparing this new Dutch Energy Act that we have heard about already, that also includes the transposition of the Clean Energy Package. And I believe that it's also this is also part of the experience that he will be sharing with us. Maybe Jose, you can stop sharing your screen. Yes, thank you. And Lars, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Valerie. Well, indeed, we already talked a lot about the Dutch experiences by Douwe and Klaas, so I can be quite brief and short. I think from my perspective, I'm working as a policy officer at the Dutch Ministry. So my role was in fact creating a bit the regulatory framework around the initiatives that were created. So when we started in 2019, indeed the whole idea about data sharing was published by our ministry, and also based on the report of Inopay, or Douwe told about that. And in fact, we are within this new Energy Act, we are creating one of the smaller elements of the whole ecosystem. And of course, because it is about energy data, it is a heavily regulated market. So it will not develop out of it itself, but we need a bit of a push in the legislation. So what we did in the new Energy Act, in fact, we designated all kinds of tasks and responsibility to different type of entities, because in the Netherlands it is quite scattered. We have TSOs, DSOs, of course, but also we have a lot of metering companies who do part of the data collection. So it's very scattered. So it's important that there are tasks and responsibilities in the Act. Besides that, we created indeed that public data exchange entity that Klaas told about, and we also created in the law the obligation to make agreements within the sector about data sharing. So it's a bit of an a soft push towards these kinds of schemes, which we created, and the law creates in fact a bit the regulatory framework conditions around it. That's it, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Lars. Very interesting complementary perspective to what we have already heard before today. So I will immediately move to our last but not least speaker, Georg Hartner from Austria. For many years, he was active in consultancy related to risk management and compliance in energy wholesale trading. And now he's working as an expert for data management, interoperability, and distributed energy for the Austrian Energy Association. He's also a member of the European Smart Grids Task Force, but in this session, he will be sharing with us the Austrian national experience with energy data exchange. So Georg, the floor is yours.
Hi, hope you can all hear me. I'll talk about our Austrian energy data space. In Austria, development started in 2012. When we talk about energy data exchange in Austria, at first we talk about business processes, business requirements, and the Austrian energy associations are facilitating developments. They are defining use cases, defining business processes where people and all affected stakeholders basically sit together. This is what we call the YANG, standardized business processes. And then we talk about which data is exchanged in the course of these business processes. And that is what we call the YIN. So very important prerequisite for our energy data space, for decentralized energy data space. Here is a standardized data format. And as a last step, we talk about how we exchange that data in a secure, decentralized, and data protection compatible manner. And as I've said, standardized data exchange here in Austria started in 2012 with the supplier switching process. Further market communications followed for billing, measurements data exchange, integrated data sharing, energy community support, and distributed flexibility to come, amongst a variety of other energy-related use cases. In Austria, technical documentation like processes or information schemas are elaborated by electricity and gas companies via working groups organized by their associations. For this purpose, the responsibility was transferred from and by the Austrian regulator E-Control to the Austrian associations in 2015, regulated in the market role specifications, sonstige Marktregeln, Kapitel 5 we call them, so it is woven into law. Each new market process is publicly consulted via the industry website evutilities.at and must be implemented by everyone after completion of the consultation in a binding manner. Our website evutilities.at embodies a one-stop service point for all market and communication participants. And as a guiding principle in Austria, data is kept at the source and only exchanged within the context of clearly defined business processes. So we don't copy or require people to copy data to a central data hub on hold. There must be a purpose for data exchange. And this is highly compatible with data protection and system safety and security requirements. And it makes it straightforward for us to work alongside established distributions of responsibility. So our market communication environment doesn't interfere with other distributions of responsibility, which resolves a lot of potential conflicts up front. And the developments here led organically to a democratized Austrian energy data space rather than to the creation of organized, centralized data hubs. And if we look at the presentations in session 1, you will find a lot of the building blocks that were presented in the reference architectures there in the Austrian energy data exchange environment. Some learnings you probably have three options when you talk about energy data exchange. On the left column, you see a dead end. That is where we started from. No standardization, no standardized document formats, no standardized messaging format, no hub, low transaction costs, but high maintenance effort, of course. Then in the middle, you see the option of a hub, where you have a standardized data format. You don't have a messaging standard probably, but you have a hub that takes care of it all. And here you have reduced integration costs, but the hub operation doesn't really prevent you from the standardization effort. And here in Austria, we are taking a decentralized approach. We are focusing on standardization and on people talking together and working on the business process and business processes and their standards, which leads to a low investment because they share the software costs, low integration costs because everyone has to follow a standard by law, and low transaction costs. And the key lesson learned here is that for us, if standardization is done well, there is no advantage in centralization. Some best practices, and that's my concluding slide. Best practice 1, it is very flexible, and best practice 1 that we have here in Austria with regards to customer consent management or data sharing, we have a very flexible and decentralized data sharing mechanism, which is used to share master data, measurement data, but also information on distributed flexible assets in the future, and is also laid out for the requirements of energy communities, basically. And for us, or in Austria, any role can share data using the same process from their respective data silo. And this is a big asset as more and more complex use cases and the diversity of roles need to be supported. Also best practice, we are looking how to integrate EU logins and EIDAS because reliable and secure authentication identification is a thing that we can't solve in the energy sector on our own. And this is a very good cross-functional initiative that the Commission are driving here. We're already thinking of how we can integrate this in our energy data space at the different places where identification, authentication happens in an integrated and consistent way. And another best practice is that we are completely based on open standards. We prevent vendor logins. We offer a low barrier approach, so you don't need to install a full software stack to take part in energy market communication. If you're a smaller market participant or an end customer or a small energy community operator, you can use a web portal, and you can also use an email gateway, very cost efficient, but you can use the full functionality of market communication here. And what we also see, and that's my last sentence here in the intro, market communication is extending constantly and rapidly, horizontally as well as vertically, in a step-by-step manner here. And it's done by its users and driven by their needs in their own working groups.
Thank you, Georg. I see that there is a question to you in the chat. Maybe you can answer in just 1 or 2 sentences. And it's about whether there are new processes set up for new use cases. So how do you take into account new use cases in this Austrian energy exchange?
New use cases, okay. Well, if there is a need for a new use case, a consultation is started through ebutilities.at by the association, Austrian Energy Association. Then a working group is formed, and through a clearly defined consultation process, stakeholders sit together and agree on a use case.
Great, thank you. So thank you, dear panelists, for your presentations and for these very interesting insights into what's going on at the national level. We have roughly 20 minutes left, 25, so we will move to an open discussion. May I ask all of you to open your cameras so that our participants can also see you? Perfect. And we have 4 topics to cover if we have enough time. The aim is twofold. Once we want to go a bit deeper into the lessons learned that you have already touched upon. And the second element is also that we would like to discuss the potential for scalability of these national experiences that you have, or the elements that are included from a national to European level. So the first topic that we would like to discuss is about a common or standardized data framework. And I think many of you have already mentioned elements. I have noted down a lot of things, starting from interoperability to use cases, standardization, trust, fairness, sovereignty, transparency, and so on. So maybe I can first give the floor to Jose, because I think you and many others also on the panel have a lot of experience with the standardized data framework. So based on your experience, what could be these elements that you could include in such a framework?
As you said, most of those elements, components are probably necessary to create such I would say, a complex ecosystem of data for the energy sector. If I have to highlight some of the components or some of the standards that, at least from our experience, especially in the Platoon project, we are checking, is it has been said a lot, but I'm happy. I think it was very good, the presentation from Antonio Abela, because I think interoperability, I mean, not only talking about data ready to be shared, data formats and standards somehow. He was talking about standards. I don't know if the 5-word foundation is de facto standard or an agile standard, but we need that kind of tools, not only just to be able to share data, but I think there's also a relevant issue that has not been mentioned so often, is the quality of data. I mean, companies cannot spend a lot of time, users can spend a lot of time checking the quality, if the data is in the correct format, if the frequency of data that are being received is the right for the different applications or for the different analytics that are going to be carried out. So I think interoperability and this, for instance, 5-word or those kinds of standards are key. And the second one is the connectors or the tools to guarantee the trust in the exchange. I mean, one of the issues that are hindering a lot of these projects is the readiness of the owners of the data to share that information. And I think building components or having these possibilities like the IDS connectors that also Thorsten Hulsmann has described in his presentation, it's been very useful for us in a project like Platoon that has 7 pilots with wind farms, consumers, smart grids. I mean, the need to exchange data from different owners that can be, in some cases, very reluctant to share or they would like to know what kind of use is going to be done with those data and where are they reaching through that marketplace I have described. So I would highlight being coherent also with the Platoon approach, interoperability standards and connection data connectors standards are key, I think, for building this architecture.
Thank you, Jose. I see other panelists nodding their heads. I don't know if somebody wants to come in, maybe Lars or Georg on this, or Henrik. Yes, please.
In our setting, we are using a very, very simple approach on the low level, close to the user. So when we get closer to the user, we are just broadcasting price signal. And some of the reasons for that, or there are many reasons for that, one of the reasons is that we would like to prioritize privacy and respect GDPR, so we only have a one-way communication. Many of our data does not leave the home, the smart home, the wastewater treatment plant, or even the mobile phone. So if you lose your mobile phone, the data are lost. But the key information about your flexibility is sent to the operator which is needed. But that cannot be used for anything else. So in order to have a robust system, and also in order to do sector coupling, because in our system we are having heat market, we have a lot of district heating because we can use district heating for even for seasonal storage, storing the heat from summer to winter and so on. But we also, of course, have electricity markets, and they need to work together. And if you just take a ISCAN or electricity standard, it would not work for heat. So that's why when we go to the lower level, the wastewater treatment plant, the district heating plant, and so on, we simply broadcast price signals dynamically, and we use the concept of flexibility functions.
And this flexibility function, I understand, is also a way to include new players, right? So you said
Yes.
already across sectors, but it does not really matter where an asset or a player comes from.
No, it can be all. We operate a lot of pilots, both in Denmark, but now also all over Europe. So it's schools, supermarket, cooling houses, wastewater treatment plant, water towers, and of course private homes and things like that.
I think Georg wants to come in.
Yeah, I also wanted to support what Henrik said, and I wanted to add that, you know, as the question is, what are the key elements of a common and standardized data framework? What can be made or done cross-functionally? I think identification and authentication is a very important topic that can be shared and should be shared across sectors. The other thing is that, like from our experience in Austria, it should be possible to achieve a highly flexible and highly cross-sectoral mechanism for data sharing. So maybe you can extract the data that is to be shared from the underlying consent mechanism, which will also have an effect on trust, because you know, trust because of being used, recognizing the means and the way that you're sharing data from different data pods should be similar. And then there are certainly elements that can't be done in a common way, like some processes in the energy sector will be highly different from processes in finance. So there will be differences, but there is certainly a lot of things that can and should be resolved in a unified way. And once again, EIDAS will solve a lot of issues, especially if we talk about cross-border data sharing.
Thank you, Georg. I think we can move to the next topic, because it has already been mentioned a bit by Henrik. And this would indeed be that we have heard about different models, centralized versus decentralized, and Henrik has also already been talking about where the decision-making can be, or where the control is, and about, if I consult my notes here, about a hierarchy of controllers and localized control. And you also mentioned in your slide spatial and temporal thinking that will be important, or is important. So maybe you can go a bit more in depth in where you see this balance between local data and also centralized data collection and storage. So where is the data processed? Where is it stored? Is it in control centers, or is it really at a local level, for example, at buildings or district level, or even at the device level? So how do you see that?
Yeah, I would be happy to do so, and I think probably it's best to take some examples. If we consider ordinary family homes, we typically keep the data on the edge or locally. So the only thing we communicate is some signals, for instance, the flexibility function, which tells how flexible our system is at home. Another example, which might be a very good example, is the wastewater treatment plants. Water handling and handling of wastewater uses a lot of energy. And together with our TSO, and we only have Energinet, Denmark is a small country, Standard Denmark made a series of workshops together with wastewater operators. And we were discussing whether they could bid into the market, a flexibility market or whatever. But the conclusion was very, very clear. They could easily provide flexibility if they could operate according to a price signal. And the price signal should, of course, reflect, for instance, the CO2 content, the electricity mix, and the challenges in the grids. So it should be a mix. And of course, some of the price should go from the day ahead where you buy the energy also. So this composite price signal is what they can play up with. But if they should bid into the market, they will never do that, because their main concern is to avoid water in the streets and avoid dirty water in the sea around Denmark. So, but if they just get a price signal, they will be happy to try to earn some money to react to this price signal. And we have created a system together with Veolia in France where we can do that automatically. So that's up and running in a number of wastewater treatment plants. The problem is still that Europe need to enforce this this use of price signals and the way of doing that. And here you also need specialized aggregators. It can be useful, which I have an expertise on wastewater treatment. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Henrik. Does anybody else want to come in on the second topic? Otherwise, I think we could. Yes, Georg?
Yeah, just one thing. Talking about centralized or decentralized, it's a hard question. Where do we aggregate, right? So we will always need some sort of data hubs. And I think if we talk about how far should European legislation or regulation go, it's more or less, I think, inevitable that data management stays at the national level, and member states can decide for whether they go for a central data hub like in like the Danish model, or for decentralization like in the Netherlands or in Austria. I think also the pattern of EIDOS shows that federated solutions that provide a common European solution on top of these member state decisions are possible, and we should rather go for these.
Thank you, Georg. I think with that we can move on. No, Henrik wants still to come in. Please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit confusing that we're calling it Central Denmark. It's actually quite decentralized. So a lot of data stays around in the different living labs and so on. So it's actually more a way where all university and a lot of DSOs, TSOs, and so on exchange information. So we don't. It's not centralized. It's rather decentralized, I would say, or a combination maybe.
Great, thank you for the clarification. So we see again that it's important to have a common understanding of things. As also when we talk about interoperability, I think this is important. So the third topic that we would like to discuss is a bit leveraging on the fact that we have representatives from different parts of the sectors in this panel. We would like to take the opportunity to discuss a bit the role of private versus public actors in also driving the market for innovative energy services. And here I would actually like to ask Lars to come in first, because I think an interesting point is also based on a Dutch experience. What would be what is the motivation of a public actor or of the government to support such infrastructures for data sharing, for example, and also to what extent are you involved in both these sector-specific initiatives, but also in the cross-sectoral initiatives?
Well, thank you, Valerie. Yeah, indeed, I think it's a very good question to what is the balance between private and public entities, and then of course you have the different grid operators, which are to some extent also semi-public entities. I think from the Netherlands we have quite a strict model in the energy market. We have full ownership unbundling. So we really see the TSOs and DSOs as designated to their tasks, and they should do what is regulated. So and we expect that innovation, etc., is mainly should come from the market. Yeah. Of course, there's a role for the TSOs and DSOs there also to enable that, especially in early market developments, etc. But in fact, innovation should come from market initiatives. The role of the government is, to that extent, is how we see it, mainly facilitating, so enabling or providing the regulatory frameworks, but also, of course, like the data sharing coalition, which is in fact paid for a large extent by our ministry. That is also seen as an enabler, facilitator, etc. So it's a delicate balance, I think, between these various type of entities.
So the support could be financial, could be organizational, could maybe also be in terms of an early adopter of such infrastructures. Interesting perspective. I would also like to ask Jose to come in, because I understand that you have that you work with public-private partnerships and that you have a lot of experience there. So what is your view on this role, private versus public actors?
Yeah, in our case, the issue that we have learned somehow is that data normally, or most of data, at least in the energy sector, as long as we call the DSOs or TSOs private actors, because they can be in a regulated environment. I mean, they are strictly controlled by regulatory issues, but they are private companies that have their own boards and their own, let's say, business models. So data come normally from private owners. So that's something that has to be dealt with. I mean, it's not it's an issue of how you can exchange and how you can get value out of this data, thinking that there is a company, a private company behind. And then the public sector is what we are from both Platoon and also at regional level asking public entities to regulate or to somehow foster, let's say, by some kind of regulations, or in some cases it should be only recommendations, how to evolve and how to make this data available to third parties, to consumers. I will mention also one of the parts of the value chains that is mostly forgotten in these issues about data is what we call the value chain. I mean, the European industry. We're talking about consumers, we're talking about big utilities or DSOs or TSOs. We are forgetting that there is a very huge and very competitive industrial value chain that does not have access to those data normally, because they are in a different flow, let's say, between consumers, generators, or distributors. So maybe the role of public entities here, and that's what we are at least trying to do, is ask them to, on the one side, to work to coordinate somehow a lot of initiatives, building blocks, pilots that are being developed throughout Europe. So there would be a need for an additional effort to coordinate and maybe exchange all the knowledge that is being developed in those projects. And then secondly, to look for mechanisms, tools, regulations that could incentivize that these private owners of data make them available in the right time, in the right way for all the rest of the participants, the stakeholders in the energy value chain. So that's at least the two issues that we are discovering in our experiences here in these projects.
And I think that relates well to this soft push that was mentioned by Lars before on the role of the government and also public actors. So we have 5 minutes left, and I would like to use the time to give the word to each of you again, and to also, in line with the previous panel that did something very similar, to share maybe your most important lesson learned. And also, if you could touch upon the potential for scalability, if it's an element that you want to highlight. And I think it could be either something, you know, that indeed has worked and can be scaled, but it could also be a hurdle that you were facing. And then we might see that different national initiatives face the same hurdles. And we can put that as an input also to the action plan. So maybe we can go in the direction that we used in the beginning. I would start with Henrik.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what we have learned is that the use of flexibility functions is extremely useful in order to link high-level static markets to the physics, low-level physics and dynamics. So this is a key concept in our smart energy operating system. One hurdle we have, or one challenge we have, is that a lot of the players still believe that on the low level we need to bid into a flexibility market using block bids and things like that. And that will never work, because if you are on a DSO area like a feeder, the liquidity is low, and it does not respect the dynamics which actually needs to be taken care of on a low level. Because if a supermarket has been flexible for this half an hour, then it cannot be flexible for the next half an hour, because then the milk will be too warm. We need to build this dynamics and also stochasticity into the setting and into the new market principles, or what we should call it. in the eBalance Plus platform, we call it local flexibility markets, but it's heavily linked to the flexibility functions.
Thank you, Henrik. Jose, your lessons learned?
The first lesson, I mean, the good news is that I think throughout Europe, there is a lot of building blocks that have already been developed, or they are at a very relevant, I would say, stage of development. We have listened today to responses of Firewall Foundation, IDSA Association. I mean, all those building blocks are very useful, and they are doing, we have noticed a very good job at setting the standards, setting the tools to be used by the different approaches and different applications. We have also learned as a good news that there are a lot of projects and a lot of companies developing applications, toolboxes, I mean, developing all these architectures. I would say that, as I mentioned before, the next thing probably would be not just this cross-sectorial cooperation or cross-sectorial interlinks, but also in some cases this cross-project collaboration. I mean, we have noticed we are also working in the OpenDI network, some working groups that the OpenDI project have launched different working groups. And it's been very interesting experience because we are discovering projects that are developing architectures and components that can be very complementary in some cases to the ones that we are developing in Platoon. In some of the cases, maybe there can be some overlapping. Some projects are developing tools that are quite similar or very similar to the ones we are now doing in our projects. So I would say there is a need for this effort, additional maybe layer that could make projects take advantage of the results, of the progress, of the building blocks that have already been developed. I think Alberto Alvela also was very clear when he said that we are not here to reinvent a lot of things. Of course, there can be different companies competing and they have the right to have different approaches and applications, but I think the bottom layers, I mean, those that make standards possible should be shared in a more extensive way, let's say.
Thank you, Jose. Lars?
Yeah, of course, interoperability was already mentioned several times, which I would underline. Also, digital identity, I think, is an issue that should be top priority for the European Commission. Two things, maybe a bit of a niche topics where we touched upon is the GDPR. I think as we in the Netherlands, we have quite a strict privacy authority, which I think can form a burden or a hindrance for full exploitation of the use of energy data. I think that is also something that is in the interest of the Commission. And maybe another niche topic is that we also face a bit the metering quality. So we see that we have smart meters, etc. But in fact, you want to use all kinds of meters. How can you trust that data? How can you use that? How can you ensure that it is trustworthy? And I think the current MID directives, etc., they are outdated and they are not supporting this fast developments.
Thank you, Lars. And Georg, can I ask you to be brief?
Yeah. I think we should put the opinions and the needs of stakeholders first. We should build upon systems and data spaces that work alongside existing distributions of responsibilities, because that saves us a lot of conflicts. We shouldn't mix up things. And as we've seen today, I think more decentralized solutions work quite well because they are prepared very well to integrate diverse new players. And we should not fall into a reflex for centralization when we go further towards digitalization.
Thank you, Georg. So thank you, dear panelists, all of you. Thanks for the many interesting insights that you shared with us. Thank you also again to the European Commission for giving us the opportunity to discuss these things. We hope that we provided some inputs for the ongoing digitalization of energy action plan. And with this, I think I can hand back over to the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you so much for all the panelists. Really enlightening and stimulating discussions. I put down a lot of points of where we need to act, where we still have remaining challenges. The decentralized governance and how to phrase the flexibility functions, I think, remains at certainly at the top. How to deal with interoperability. So we plan for a last panel, the way forward. So I think those people which I'm inviting now, will help me a bit, hopefully help me a bit to capture the main comments, to prioritize actions, and to distill what are the key elements where we have to pay attention on. So I'm happy to invite Antoni Kong from Trialogue, but also, as a representative of the Alliance IoTI work group on standardization, which was a standardization which has been a central element repeated in each and every panel today, to chair the next panel. Antonio, the floor is yours. Are you able to connect? I thought you were trying at least.
I think he's still muted.
Are you still muted?
Okay, so how do I do that?
Now we can hear you.
Now we can hear you, sorry. So
now we can see you.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying, welcome everyone. We'll leverage the result of panel 2 to discuss panel 3. Well, I'm the moderator. There are 3 panelists, and we're going to give the floor just to introduce themselves. So let me start with myself. I'm the CEO of Trialogue. I have lots of experience in cyber-physical systems in general. Energy is just one of them. I would say I'm more involved in architecture, interoperability, data protection. And I'm here on behalf of AIoTI, as I'm very much involved in standardization, and I'm part of the working group on standardization. Okay. So I'm going to ask Antonello to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Antonello Monti. I'm professor at RWTH Aachen University in Germany. We're a directed group on automation of complex power system. I also have an appointment in Fraunhofer FIT, Applied Informatics, in the Center for Digital Energy. I'm active in several groups. I will mention the Working Group 4, digitalization of ITIPS.net, also the Technical Activity Council, the Linux Foundation, and the Energy Vertical within the Fiber Foundation. All these open approach foundation, I'm very active. I'm also coordinating projects in the Horizon. I will mention OneNet that was also mentioned before by Kalle, and also Platoon, not to be confused with Platoon. It's a different project, very similar.
Yeah, two interesting projects. Thank you. Olivier, can you introduce yourself? Yes, so I'm Olivier Geneste. I'm from Trialogue, involved mainly on ICT for smart energy systems, and particularly on architecture and also digital transformation of the energy system, including interoperability, data exchange, and so on. I am involved in the Bridge initiative that gathers all the Horizon 2020 project on smart grid, and I'm currently the chair of the Data Management Working Group, and I'm also involved in international standardization as co-convener of the Joint Working Group 3 of Smart Energy Roadmap of the IDSA System Committee on Smart Energy, together with ISO IEC SC41 on Internet of Things and Digital Twin. Thank you very much, Olivier. And last but not least, we have George, and he was also panelist in the previous panel. So introduce yourself again.
Yeah, now I've got my Smart Grids Task Force hat on, and in the European Smart Grids Task Force Expert Group 1 for data interoperability, we've been working to lay out interoperability requirements based on Article 24 of the Internal Market for Electricity Directive. And some of our group who did the legal drafting wanted to finish things or realize things end to end, and that is why we created Project EDDI, and a solution idea, a solution concept for a European distributed data infrastructure for energy, a common, unified, distributed, decentralized interface to energy data.
So thank you, George. We have 4 questions, but I put them into 2. The first 2 is about the prerequisites. Okay, so what are the measures so that actually we have the conditions so that energy data sharing can take place? Okay, so the context which I want to provide, and of course is very much a standardization viewpoint, is we are integrating lots of ICT technology, cybersecurity, physical system, digital twins, AI. We heard about trustworthiness, fair data space, and of course privacy and the like. Okay, so we have all those technologies. They help us build this data sharing stuff, and we have at least 2 standardization items which I think were also discussed. One is architecture alignment. Okay, and I want to cite the work of JTC1 AG8 on providing guidance how to express architecture. And the second is interoperability alignment. So that is actually trying to have an approach where interoperability will take place. Okay. So that being said, the question we have 2. One is how do we build and adopt the general data framework in Europe? Okay. We have barriers, and we might have actions to take into account those barriers. Okay. And the second is how do we seek agreements on exactly architecture, interoperability, so concepts, interface, and standards. And I already heard that there were some discussions before. So I'll give the floor to Antonello. Do you want to take the screen, Antonello?
Yes, please. I can.
So stop sharing.
You should see my screen now, and hopefully now my slide.
Yes, we see them.
Okay, yeah, I tried to summarize here in very short 2 slides. Let me start saying with a positive message, which is from a technical perspective, we don't have a problem, we don't have a solution. We have probably too many solutions. I think this is what emerged a lot also today during the discussion. And so what is critical is openness. Openness means we need to limit the fragmentation of effort. So in a lot of effort related to digitalization, we have been standard that tends to be enforced by one single player or trying to go in that direction. Vice versa, I think, and this was partly also a recent document prepared by the Linux Foundation Energy, the role of communities on creating the solution. So a more finding the solution on agreements on a bottom-up way of working more than trying to force one single solution. That means openness, that means open source, which means at the end, one clear technical aspect is to increase the support for open source. I think the Commission is already doing a good job, but I think even a bolder statement in this direction is going to be critical. I'm currently involved, as I mentioned, in the OneNet project. We have been put at the center as a requirement that the new solution that we develop, they create those connectors that allow data exchange among countries and among DSO and TSO. All this connector have to be delivered at open source. And I think this has to become a standard way of working, which is still not the case 100%. I think we are getting there, but it's not there. And so these 3 aspects together are critical because that's the best way to, in my view, to achieve interoperability. There is a second aspect that complements here the puzzle in my first statement slide, which is digital education. We have been talking a lot, mentioned several times customers, but it's really hard to get them to understand what you're talking about. I know also here there are efforts. I heard that project called EDI. There is another EDI project on education for the digital transformation that is dealing with schools up to the university. But my concern is also the guy on the street. So to make people understand why digitalization is important for the energy transition, why we need everybody in this process. So I summarized that in 2 building blocks, because I heard today many times the Lego building blocks, and I love this reference. Interoperability and education are the 2 technical aspects. On the regulatory, I really appreciate what I heard before on the standardization. I totally agree with what Fiverr, but maybe it's not a chance because I'm also cooperating with Fiverr. But also in the Linux Foundation, we have the same view. a faster path to standardization is critical. The rhythm is totally different, and that's what we need. But that means immediately linking to the legal harmonization. I think we do a lot of work very well at the European level. Then my experience, a lot of roadblocks come when it moves down to the member states. That's where the process is not as cohesive and synchronous and coordinated as we can achieve at the European Union. And that's something we need to think, maybe saying directly involving member states a lot from the beginning. Linked to this legal aspect, standardization is process and procedure for interoperability, because this is new as a concept for the energy. We are used, interoperability for electrical engineers means I can connect the two wires and the voltage is the same. Here we're talking about a completely different level of interoperability. And connected to the previous dot, the clear info to the customers, which are summarized again in 2 points: fast standards and transparencies. The second question you asked me is about what actions. They are coherent with the previous part. Openness and transparency are the key factor. And to convince industry, we need to look at the telecommunications sector. They have been doing this. That's the way they achieve a fast transition from new generation of network, from 4G to 5G, before 3G to 4G. It works great. I think energy should learn a lot. And again, this means that we need a really fast funnel of innovation, from the project research to creating open source community to maintain the results and make sure those go on. And then from there, from those community, we go to standard. I think this will be the process I envision. And with that, I pass to the next.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to give the floor to Olivier, and he will take his view on the same question.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. We see it. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So what I wanted first to emphasize was related to the fact that when we are looking at this topic of data exchange, we really need to have a specific focus on cross-sector data exchanges. So when we look at this digitalization of energy, we have 3 main use cases that were raised, and they involve several domains. So if you look at the first one, which is flexibility products for the energy market, so that's mainly for the energy sector. But when we go into smart buildings, smart appliances, and seeing how home and building can provide demand-side flexibility, then we are having to exchange data between 2 different roles with different standards and different approaches. And the same with smart charging in V2G, in which we involve both the energy sector and the mobility and transport sector. So we really need to have this cross-sector data exchange, and this has to be done at several levels. And you may recognize here the layers that we have in the SGAM smart grid architecture model. Then this is something that we develop also in Bridge. I will explain that later. But at business level, we need to have to be able to have this interoperability about roles, about governance and regulation. Also at function level, we go into functional processes for data exchange, how we can support the data exchange between sectors. We need to have the similar functional processes. And then, of course, when we go to information level, we all know that probably a common data model or at least ontology would be required to have the same understanding and interpretation of data. And this could go on also with communication level with protocol, but then we go more and more to the technical part. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight regarding data exchange, that we need to look at cross-sector. And the second one is that we have a very good opportunity, which is linked to the fact that we have several Horizon 2020 research and innovation projects. So, and since 2016, they are all together gathered in this Bridge initiative. So now we have more than 90 projects from the beginning, 1,000 experts, and several hundreds of million euros funding. And in fact, it is organized around 4 working groups. You see this: data management, customer and citizen engagement, business model, and regulation. So I'm taking care of data management. And in this group, we are doing cooperation between several EU projects to achieve some common results. And since now 2 years, we've been working on going deeper into these results so we can update them each time we really have something that would be useful inside a European project, but also beyond. And so, for example, we published this year what will be the bridge use case repository that will include the use cases that are defined in the several bridge projects and can be reused by future projects. We also, and Kalle Kuk from the first panel session is pretty much involved in that work on this EU data exchange reference architecture. In particular, this year we'll release this DIRA 2.0 with a specific focus on cross-sector data exchanges. And also we develop an interoperability framework for flexibility that goes from a flexibility market down to the flexibility asset activation. And so that's what we did in Bridge. And now the next step is that we need to have an impact beyond EU research and innovation project. So for that, we need to disseminate practical results so they can be reused by the industry project. And also we need to strengthen the cooperation with EU and worldwide standardization. I mentioned here in particular Sentinel-like ETSI coordination group on smart grids, and also in ISO and IEC, as I already mentioned about System Community Smart Energy and SC41 Internet of Things and Digital Twin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I give the floor to George. I wanted to say that Antonello highlighted open source education, while Olivier mentioned the cross-sector issue and the transfer to industry. Okay, so now, George, your take.
Okay, good. I'm unmuted now. So it's a bit bad that I didn't come directly after Antonello because we didn't even get to the same name. I think we share a lot of observations and conclusions as well. In the Smart Grids Task Force Expert Group 1 for Data Interoperability, we were working for like more than 2 years, sitting together and talking together with a lot of data sharing infrastructure operators, mainly also with DSOs from a lot of countries. We were scanning in detail the existing data sharing infrastructures. You know, a lot has been demanded from grid operators and a lot has been delivered. And the question was, what are the technical barriers, legal barriers and so forth? I would like to talk about what can we achieve with what can we realize with what has already been achieved and established. And in the Smart Grids Task Force, we were drafting like recommendations for implementing acts to foster interoperability. Where do we find a place for the standards? Which reference models can we agree upon? But we made a lot of additional findings, and we wanted to consolidate our findings into an open source project to act as a focal point for further developments, to like coin our findings into code. And that is how we created Project EDI, European Distributed Data Infrastructure for Energy. So on the top side, you have an active European customer using the services of like energy consultants, energy communities, flexibility service providers, and also wholesale actors. And then we divided use cases, data sharing use cases into 3 classes, mainly in line with the current scope of the European interoperability effort based on Article 24. You have national like online data sharing infrastructures, like measurement data that is stored by your DSO or TSO that needs to be made available. But you also have in-house data. We have already heard today that a lot of valuable data is locked in-house, and therefore we said it would make sense to create a trusted structure. We called it an administrative interface for in-house data access, where you can weave the access to these in-house sensors, near real-time data from smart meters, but also aggregated data, make it available to the players up here in a trusted and standardized way. And the other data class would be public data, where the main problem is not the access, the main problem is standardization here. And with a little assessment or an intensive assessment, actually, like we were mainly working with data sharing infrastructure operators of the countries that you see here in green. so that means that already, like our estimation would be about 69%, 79% of this data here is possible to be made available through a common European interface. And if you spin further, you can also add additional countries, other EU member states, and also non-EU data would be possible, which would allow these players here to scale and operate at a European scale rather than on their national nutshell. That was the idea behind. And yeah, so 4 things. It should be possible to build upon existing national data spaces. Identification and authentication, I told you before, is a thing that we can and should not solve within energy alone. And at a European level, we should tackle the shortcomings in governance and scope of existing standards. There are existing conflicting role models and information models. We need to tackle this in an orchestrated European way. And we should also think of other data silos than just grid operators. And the last thing, maybe we should tackle interoperability in primary legislation already. Because if we look at things like energy communities, things are drifting apart already again. And after years, we are trying to tackle the interoperability issue the hard way.
Yes, thank you. So you focus on learning from experience at the AD project, and also a number of items of importance, governance, federation, and interoperability, which I believe is also very important. Okay, thank you. So let's go through, I'm going to grab the screen and show the second set of questions. So let's see. Yeah, so let's see. So it's about scale up and growing. Okay, so if we have the conditions and we don't grow, nothing works. So we have to transfer to the industry. Okay, and the context is, of course, there are lots of initiatives where we want to grow. So I'm very much standardized oriented, but I just want to mention networking. So initiatives from associations like eBus, ontologies. We have this SAREF initiative in Europe. Data models, which is pushed thanks by the Fireware Foundation, where we can, let's say, publish models which you can exchange. And of course, at the end, I would say what I'm going for, interoperability profiles. And this is, for instance, what NIST is doing with NIST framework and interoperability profiles. At the end of the day, we want to exchange, so we have interoperability profiles. So the question to the panel is, what kind of approach, forum, or platform should we have in order to have an uptake of practice? And how do we ensure that the scale-up is also European? I mean, do we need to coordinate? Can we leverage existing work? Okay, I believe so. So give back the floor now to Antonello, okay? And if you want to address this question.
Okay, yes, I also put together a slide to summarize. So I agree with you that we can use a lot that is already there in terms of community. I think many of them be mentioned. The bridge that was mentioned before, just a few minutes ago, definitely it's a good way to bring the research. One important element is currently what I said before, the open source, open specification communities. So Fiverr, we have seen what Fiverr can do in terms of data models. I think what Alberto presented this morning is a very important example of how those communities can contribute. The same, I will say, on the software side, for example, of components like automation and so on, is doing the Linux Foundation, which has both those initiatives. I like the fact they are global. So we are talking about European, but actually the open source is given a global dimension, as also the standardization bodies like IDSA. So I think in that respect, currently, with what I said before, the open source communities are critical in this path, critical for making sure the solution move from project and survive, which is one of the challenges, and second, that they evolve later towards standardizations as important. Another element that vice versa is the part of interoperability. Of course, the open source develop solutions, but then we need to have a support of interoperability community and also a way to certify in laboratory that this interoperability is there. So an important aspect that I think we will need, and I'm directly working on this, is the creation of interoperability communities and networks collaboratory that can support this to make sure that all the interest and involvement of the stakeholders, I mentioned some of them in the bottom part of the slides, they can be channeled in these interoperability actions. On top, of course, the supervision of the European Commission is always critical to give this European dimension. And to be also concrete in what I'm saying, I would like to announce that there will be somehow you may say this is a continuation of OpenDI, specifically in the interoperability aspects in energy. But there is a newer CSA that the GA been submitted the final version yesterday, so it's can be more fresh as a new. It's the Internet and Interoperability Network for the Energy Transition. Is a new CSA that wants to play this role at European level, taking the work of OpenDI, collaborating with Bridge, and creating the proper community that can tackle the different aspects that were mentioned also before. So governance, test and certification, knowledge base, development of maturity models. All those will be the core of this CSA, which is really aiming at targeting some of the challenges we mentioned. So I would like to bring this as a new instrument that will be available, and many of the people also involved in the discussion today are partner in this CSA. So the fact that we all are here is the proof the consortium is actually bringing the main actors together, and that's, to me, it's a clear signal that we are on the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me express my take of what you just say. We want to create an ecosystem of building blocks, and you believe open source will be there. Okay, and we want to create an ecosystem of interoperability. So it's the two things that will make the thing happen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I give the floor to Olivier.
Yes. Okay. Second, as an answer to this part, I wanted first to mention that we have a lot of existing solutions, but we need to increase the awareness of the existing solution and get some commitment from a new project and industry players to use them. So first, we need to take into account that, in fact, many solutions exist, but they come from different initiatives and they have different approaches. Some of them are top-down, meaning in particular in standardization, we start from a problem at the beginning and then try to define a relevant solution. Some others are bottom-up. In some project, we are facing an issue and directly implementing something and then trying to make it reusable by others and ensure interoperability. And also some of them are short-term. We are trying to solve the problem of today and tomorrow, and some of them more long-term, like the day after. And so this is done inside EU research and innovation. So I mentioned Bridge and all these projects. It is the case also in standardization and industry alliances. And so we have all these solutions that need to be provided together and need to be promoted. So if we want existing solution to be used, we need really to promote the use of this solution by the industry, so we can get a commitment from the industry that, okay, this solution is the right one and they will be used because they can help to achieve interoperability. But in order to achieve that, there are several requirements I wanted to highlight. So the first one is that we need to define some profiles of the existing solution standard and make sure that they support the use case that will be of interest for the industry and will make sense from both technical and business perspective. Also, it means that we need to educate the potential implementer and integrator so they know what are the existing solutions, how they can be used, what they are designed for and what they are not designed for. and so they can really have a good start instead of trying to use solution in the wrong way or trying to define something new because they don't understand what has been done before. The third one, which is really important, and it was also raised during the first panel session by Fireware about this agile standardization, is how we collect feedback from users, from the field experiment, and how we can be agile and iteratively improve the solution, because we know that this is when we are deploying that we are getting good feedback and identify that we need some additional information. And for that, we cannot say that, okay, we'll just feed amendment requests that will take 2 years to be managed by the standardization bodies. So we need to have something quite agile. And also, it was part also of the comment from Antonello about the fact that when we have a solution or a standard, we need to offer the schemes that will allow to check the conformance and also the interoperability. And so for this item, what we see growing is what is called user groups. I mean, users of the technology. So it's not indeed the final user of the system, but the user of the technology that will be either implementer, integrator, or just adopter. And that will gather all together to discuss about how the solution is aligned with what they need, also to better understand how it is supposed to be used and how it is used by other parties, and also provide their feedback on what they need and how they can improve it, and make sure that they have some services to make this more effective. And so we see some examples here. We see ENSUI with a SIM expert group, which is a big role for Europe. We see SunSpec or OpenIDR, which are specific alliances on protocols. Some of them are now standard, but still it is under this user group, and I think that we can discuss about the right way to use them. We see USEF, the Flex community around Flex offer, and also some other specific to some other domain.
Okay, thank you. So Olivier, you highlighted the fact that you have many initiatives and they are all good as long as they are not siloed and we have a synergy, we create synergy between them. And I guess the announcement from Antonello about the seal protection is precisely about that. You also mentioned the fact that, and it was agreed throughout all the panels, that we need to be more agile in terms of standardization. You know that the good old standardization bodies, they are slow, but they are working on what they call smart standards that are created in an agile way. And I hope that we'll be able to leverage that in the future. So I'll give the floor to George to have his take on the questions.
Yes, thank you. Once again, you were talking about the standards, a smart place for standards, a smart place to combine, a smart way to combine legislation and standardization. We talked about this a lot, and a lot of this will be, a lot of the findings of the Smart Grids Task Force will be published in the report that will come soon. I think also the last slide that Antonello showed shows a lot of elements that are very important, and it's very important to see interoperability not as a one-off thing, but as a step-by-step exercise and a continuous exercise. And I would like to continue that thought. In our ADI project, we had people from the Lisbon Council who published in 2019 a publication called A Roadmap for a Fair Data Economy, because the question was how to drive the uptake of the process and of data sharing, probably. And their observation was that you have active customers that adopt more data-driven services. Data holders hold and manage data measured about the users, and they create the structures for data sharing, and data reusers or data-driven services can provide or will provide services to active customers. And the more happy these customers are with the services these data-driven services provide, or the reusers provide, the more happy they will be to share additional data. And if they share additional data, we will see new services. And if users are happy with these new services, they will demand for even more services. And this works in both directions. So it's very important to foster trust, stability, quality of these services, and to get into a virtuous cycle step by step and growing. But we should take care of certain things, and most importantly, trust and reliability of these services. And actions to support agreements on concepts, interfaces, and standards. I think it would be a good thing to respect the principle of subsidiarity, leverage the bottoms-up potential of national data spaces and things that are already there. The topic of identification and authentication, especially of non-domestic parties. So we see a lot of issues for like German companies wanting to access data in Spain, for example, because these...
George, excuse me, I think you already covered this slide, and you should go to question 4, I think.
Oh,
we just discussed.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, it's quite similar anyhow. Data access by non-domestic counterparties is an issue. They face high barriers. So, for example, in country A, you would need a VAT number for foreigners to be able to register on a data hub or a data sharing infrastructure, which is quite time-consuming. Also, a thing that would be solvable through EIDAS. Then, with our solution architecture, we wanted to demonstrate that it is possible to go without centralized dependencies or external dependencies, so you can bring your own infrastructure. The framework that we highlighted as an open source solution would be installable to a laptop, as well as an enterprise infrastructure, as well as a standard cloud infrastructure. There is no need for a central European data hub in our view, and we should support and foster quality, trust, and cooperation between the market roles. And maybe it would be a good thing to enable data-driven services to start right at the European scale, then have them start on their national nutshell with their national integrations.
Thank you very much. I think you again mentioned the return of experience and the fact that if we create a virtuous cycle, this will grow. And you also mentioned the connection to the legacy. We cannot reinvent the wheel and just not ignore the past. Authentication, mentioned EIDAS, and of course, switching from a national view to a European view to leverage the big synergy that it will create. Thank you very much. I think we are done with the panel, and I would like to give the floor back to Rolf for concluding the session of this morning.
Yes, thank you, Antonio. Thanks for all the panelists. I mean, we are 10 minutes late, so I will try to take 5 minutes to briefly summarize some of the key points, which actually is not easy. I will not go into too much of the details, obviously, but I will certainly put something on slides which make it easier. Then just to see where I put it. We had embarked on different panels today. We started with best practice. I think it's called best practice workshop. Now, where can I share my slide? Screen 1, yes, I go. And now I should be there. And you should be able to see the slides.
Yes, I see the slides.
Okay, thank you. Basically, we started off with building blocks. Yes, I think one pillar of the European data framework is a foundation for digital and green transition is actually a data framework. A second pillar is what we also discussed today was the link to the consumer. So we started off obviously with a European data framework, and that needs building blocks, and that needs technical building blocks. We discussed the general principles to establish a data rule book to get that agreement across different stakeholders across Europe. We had examples of possible components and elements of such a framework, talking about open licenses, open smart data models, an ontology, architecture models like DIRA, the Digital Energy Reference Architecture, and always having recurring issues with interoperability. So basically, how to arrive, on an interoperability. We got an example of an energy operating system based on new flexibility functions in order to match the requirements of integrating more renewables and the dynamics in the grid. Generally agreed with we need a faster path for standardization at digital speed, more agile standardization. I think that is an ambitious task, and we have to see how we can implement and deriving actions from that first block with, from our side, we have to make it happen, how to use the building blocks and instantiate data spaces in reality, deployment actions. We learned that there's no data space without use cases, and that has to be somehow also implemented from end to end. We think about deployment programs like the Digital Euro program, also we have the CEF program. A second issue where we need actions is to address the information barriers, the diversity of standards, the speed of standardization and interoperability. To some extent, we can do that through Horizon Europe, but also through coordination and support actions and how to link to international standardization organizations. And the big question, which is not fully answered today and we still have to think about and have to find solutions, is how to link the use cases which are pertinent in many of the initiatives. We heard Gaia-X, we heard many of projects. It's a starting point also to tangibly illustrate what we want to do. How will these use cases lead to Lego building blocks which are interoperable and which can be reused later on in different initiatives? A second big theme with the support of planning and monitoring of energy infrastructure. I think that is the big success factor at the end of the day if you want to achieve the green and digital transition. How to create an economic and legal framework across different policy streams. We need a data framework that is accepted, defined and accepted by all players at European level, which would allow markets to flourish. Otherwise, we are stuck and we are in silos. We need the integration of all sectors, including transport, waste, and other energy vectors. We need cross-domain use cases to make data sharing agreements practical. And we learned there might be some three main use cases, which is buildings, EV charging, and the energy system. And that already hints that we have not only the workshop today, but also other workshops coming on Friday this week on EV charging, and next week on the 23rd on good practice in data sharing, where we also address other domains. We have learned that there's a lot of good things in national practice and national initiatives. The question is how that can be scaled up for European energy market design. And another dimension is the financial implications. So how do we do our investments into infrastructure in an intelligent way? Digitalization could help for cross-sectoral cooperation, particularly regarding data, to accelerate investment, but to make investment also more efficient and not to spoil money. As another element of the new market, the energy infrastructure, is allow new entrants, newcomers, innovation in new data services, which are eventually digital native, to come in and to compete on the market. So possible actions here are quite diverse. I think in particular the last panel tackled how to tackle conflicting standards, gaps in interoperability at the EU level. How do we arrive at data exchange arrangements agreed at the European level in order that we can scale services at the European scale? The challenge for the next market design is legislation should not act against private and public investments. I think we heard from the Netherlands we need some soft legislation in order to not spoil the private initiatives. And for us as well, but also for national bodies, is the market design across different policy streams, the energy ministries, the digital ministry, the mobility, the transport ministries. I think that remains a challenge for us as well as for national bodies. Last but not least, what was mentioned here is we need education and skills, not only from the consumer side, but also for the system, the workers who install the systems and the system design. Third element, which was a red line today, a recurring action, was the possibility of digitalization of energy governance scheme. And governance is always linked to trust and decentralized hierarchical systems, meaning that the energy system is growing in complexity across different sources and assets. We need to take a system perspective that embraces the data plane, the data governance, and to manage data spaces across different sources. We heard that there are different trust options. I think it's evident, decentralized or centralized governance. We talked about data hubs. We need energy control rooms. We talked about a facilitator entity for decentralized data sources or public supported data sharing entity. There are different options. If you look at the actions, there's no winning option yet for trust, but we think that is bound to the decision of the member states. Second issue here for the governance, giving more control to the local for local, meaning successful digitalization is built on platforms that basically allow also federated data management, use and connect what is already available. And there's a lot of things available and coming into the energy system. Convert high-level control to low-level functions. We heard a lot about flexibility functions and what does it mean at the different levels. We need to agree on flexibility signals. So challenges here again, interoperability, identity and privacy. A big question here for local would be the mechanisms to zoom in on local control, local balance. I think we talked about an energy OS today, but again, flexibility functions agreed across stakeholders. Is it possible in the future to bring your own infrastructure? Still many open questions. Actions here, I mentioned that already. There's no winning trust option at the moment. There's a wish to build on local dynamics into the market design. I think there was an example version of the MIT directive and how to drive cross-sector functions, identification, authorization, agreements on mechanisms to zoom in, flexibility functions. And I think here we've seen that Bridge has a critical mass already. The Smart Grid Task Force will play an important role, but there are also other frontline initiatives like the ETIPSNet or the Gaia-X, what we heard today, to support this agreement on cross-sector functions. Last but not least, we got a plea on the forum for open standards, open data models, and open source. I think there's a lot of communities out there. We heard about Fireware, GitHub, Linux Foundation. So how could we, in our research and innovation policy, build on that developer community, on that momentum? Think about a strategy to link and exploit momentum of large communities, how to build communities and a network of interoperability labs for testing of interoperability. And here we see that we took action already by selecting a CSA, a coordination support action, in order to bring the different bits and blocks together. And that is my capture of today. I may have missed many of the details. That is due to the long and the detailed and the rich discussions we had of today. But maybe my colleague George would come in and compliment me if I missed some important points.
Thank you, Rolf, and let me thank to all the participants for the excellent discussion. It was truly inspiring today, a lot of information for us. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm George Păunescu. I work in DG Energy in the unit dealing with research, innovation, and digitalization. And we are now working on the digitalization of energy action plan. So these all these discussions provide us an excellent input. I think, Rolf, you did already a very comprehensive summary. I would only complement, perhaps not in substance, but picking up of the, let's say, more organizational details that I picked up. I have two main points that I would want to refer to. One was on the data spaces. We heard a lot of details, of discussions, concepts, but for the data spaces, there were two aspects that I wanted to mention. First, the governance or soft infrastructure or framework. There are different degrees of overlap and terms used interchangeably. And the second one was on the use cases, that everything needs to be underpinned by the use cases. And regarding these two aspects, I just wanted to remind you that we are having a series of workshops that are coming, that were presented by Vincent in the beginning. So the good news is that these aspects, which are really important, are paramount for the logic of the whole discussion, will be further examined in our upcoming events. For instance, on the 23rd, we are having basically a policy discussion about the future governance or the framework for data exchanges at the EU level and what should be the priorities to focus on, or in other words, what are the high-level use cases. And the other workshops that are coming, that they are focused on data exchanges for specific use cases. So delving a bit more in detail for each of these use cases. We have one on the electric vehicles on the 18th of February. We have the data sharing for renewable energy on the 24th of February. And we have the prosumer and data exchanges for flexibility on the 3rd of March. And of course, we have the other discussion that's complementing all this on cooperation between energy centers and digital innovation hubs. So I would encourage you to participate to all or any of them that reflect your views and continue the discussions which started today, lay down a very clear sort of background and baseline for everything, and deepen a bit these discussions. The second point that I wanted to make was that we got a clear image of where we understood clearly what are the messages on what should be the focus and the scope of work at the European level, and what should be the focus and the scope of work at the member states level. That's something that's really important for us. It's not for the regulatory perspective that's clear for our work, but it was mentioned today a term which I think describes very well what we will try to do through the action plan: orchestration. How can we put together all these efforts? How can we assemble them best to ensure a number of things that were mentioned, starting with interoperability and ending up with new business cases and scaling up working models. And I think this is it. Thank you very much, and I'll stop here.
Yes, thanks, George. Also from my side to all panelists and speakers today. Many thanks for your time, for the rich presentations, for the excellent discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have planned time for the audience to participate in the discussion. Otherwise, we have used the whole day. I think, feel free, to submit your comments to the functional mailbox. If you have position papers, white papers, provide input. The consultation process is on. This today was the kickoff workshop on digital-driven on data spaces, on a data framework, and we're zooming in, as George said, in the next workshops from different angles. And it's a continuous process, so don't hesitate to accompany us and to support us. And we're very happy for your input and your discussion with you. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the day, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.